I found a shortcut online the night before. It was buried in the comments section of a hiking forum. Some guy posted about an off-the-map route that trimmed 3 miles off a popular loop trail in the state park. He called it a hidden gem, said it started wide and joined back with the main trail, saving time and avoiding crowds. A few others in the thread confirmed it, said it was easy to follow. I was planning to do the full loop hike the next day, but this shortcut sounded like a smarter plan. That morning, I drove out early. The trailhead was quiet, just 2 other cars in the gravel lot. I packed light, just a small backpack with a water bottle, a granola bar, a folded trail map, and my phone. I figured I'd be back before noon. I wasn't new to hiking, and the forecast was clear. Everything felt easy. The start of the shortcut was exactly where they said, about a mile in, just after the footbridge over the creek. It veered off to the right, a wide dirt path between tall oaks. No signs, but it looked used enough. The forest was beautiful. Cool air, shafts of sunlight cutting through the trees. Birds calling high above. For a while, everything was fine. The trail narrowed after a bit, but I didn't think much of it. Lots of back trails do that. I passed a couple of logs and climbed over some stones. The sound of the creek faded behind me. I walked for maybe 20 minutes before I realized there weren't any footprints around. No crushed grass, no signs of other hikers. The path had thinned to just a faint line in the underbrush. Still, I kept going. I thought the forest would open up again, that the trail would widen and join the main loop like the forum post said. I didn't want to backtrack unless I had to, but the path didn't widen. It kept narrowing until I wasn't sure there was a trail at all anymore. I looked down and saw patches of bare earth, some rocks, a few broken sticks, but nothing that screamed you're still on track. I stopped and pulled out my phone. No signal, not even a bar. I wasn't panicking yet. I had the paper map, but the shortcut wasn't on it. It was unofficial. I tried to figure out where I might be, but it was hard. Without landmarks or clear points, the green forest just stretched out endlessly in every direction. I thought maybe if I kept walking west, I'd hit the main trail eventually. So I kept moving. The forest got thicker. Vines wrapped around my legs. Dead branches snagged at my arms. I had to push through brush that scratched at my skin and blocked my view. I started checking over my shoulder every few steps to make sure I wasn't walking in circles. After half an hour, I stopped again. I hadn't seen a single sign of other hikers. My shirt was damp with sweat, and I could feel a blister starting on my heel. I drank from my bottle. Half gone already. The air felt still heavy. I turned around. I figured I could follow my own footprints back, but I hadn't left any obvious ones. The ground was firm and covered in dead leaves. Everything looked the same. I chose what I thought was the direction I'd come from and started walking. But the trees were too similar. 10 minutes later, I came across a downed tree I didn't remember. A bad sign. I sat down on a rock. My heart was beating fast now. The sun was high, but it didn't feel warm. Just exposed. The forest around me felt like it had closed in, and I started to realize just how alone I really was. I tried to stay calm. I told myself this wasn't the wilderness. This was a state park. People came here all the time. I just needed to keep moving in one direction, find a stream or a ridge or something. I started walking again. The ground rose a little, so I followed the slope. At the top of the hill, I looked out and saw more trees. That was it. No trail. No sounds. Just the soft creak of branches and the distant cry of a hawk. I kept walking. My legs were sore. My mouth was dry. At some point, I realized I was conserving water without meaning to. Just tiny sips. I had no idea how far I was from anything. An hour passed. Maybe more. I tried turning on my GPS. Nothing loaded. The blue just spun and froze. I held my phone up, walked in circles, waved it around like that would magically fix it. It didn't. Eventually, I found a muddy patch of ground with animal tracks, deer, maybe. I followed those for a while, hoping they'd lead to water. Instead, they vanished into brambles. I was running low on energy. I hadn't eaten anything. I sat down again and chewed my granola bar slowly, trying to make it last. It felt like I was doing everything wrong. No plan, no direction, no supplies. Then I saw something far away, just a faint orange flash between the trees. I stood up fast. It was gone. I moved toward where I thought I'd seen it. Another flash. It had disappeared again. I thought maybe it was someone's jacket, or a tent, or a sign. I kept walking, faster now, and almost twisted my ankle en route. But I didn't care. I needed to reach whatever it was. After about 10 minutes of scrambling downhill, I reached a clearing and stopped. There was no person, no sign, just a rusted out piece of metal. An old car door, half buried in leaves and dirt. Some junk, probably from decades ago. No trails, no people. That was when I felt the panic really start. Not a burst, just a slow, sinking feeling in my chest. I sat down and put my head in my hands. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there trying to think. Trying to not think too far ahead. I was still moving, still breathing. I had enough daylight left to keep going. That's all I told myself. I checked the position of the sun and picked a direction. I moved downhill again. Gravity was my only compass. I figured if I could find a valley, I'd find water, maybe a stream that led somewhere. The woods changed again. The trees grew older, thicker. Some had twisted branches that reached out like arms. I ignored them and kept walking. After what felt like another hour, I heard it water. Faint but steady. I turned toward it and broke through a wall of shrubs, scratched and tired. There it was. A narrow stream, clear and cold. I drank a little. I splashed my face. I knelt down and just listened. Then I followed it. I walked alongside the stream, hoping it would lead to civilization. I slipped twice on wet rocks, soaked on my shoes. But I kept going. Finally, I saw a wooden plank. Then a bridge. Then a trail marker. My legs gave out for a second. I just stood there, staring at it. It wasn't the same trail I'd started on, but it was a trail with a marker, a sign in faded paint. I didn't care what trail it was. I followed it. Half an hour later, I reached a small ranger station near a road. 2 hikers were sitting outside. They looked surprised to see me. I didn't explain much. I just asked if there was a phone I could use. They helped me. I called a local shuttle, gave them directions to my car, and finally got back to the parking lot. My hands were scratched, my feet blistered, and I was starving. But I was back. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. I kept seeing trees, branches, endless brush. I kept replaying the moment I lost the trail again and again. Since then, I've never taken advice from a forum without double-checking it. I bring extra water, a real compass, a backup map, and I stick to the trails. No shortcuts, because the forest doesn't care what you thought you knew. It's not waiting to help you. It just keeps going. And if you lose control out there, it won't notice. It won't stop. You will. I was on vacation in a country I'd never visited before. Somewhere in Eastern Europe. I won't name it. It's not the country's fault. The landscapes were beautiful. Hills that stretched out like waves, covered in dark forests. Villages tucked between valleys. I'd taken a few days off work, booked a cabin in a small rural town, and planned to do a few hikes before heading back to the city. I'd done some research beforehand. The national forest was well known among locals, but not a big tourist spot. It looked perfect, quiet, remote, away from crowds. I had one trail picked out, moderate length, about 8 kilometers. The trail map I downloaded showed it looping through the woods and back to a roadside picnic area. I planned to finish the hike by late afternoon, maybe grab dinner at a small restaurant nearby. That morning, I packed light. A bottle of water, some trail mix, my phone, and a paper copy of the map I printed at the cabin. The day was cool, cloudy, and calm. I left the car at the gravel lot and started the trail. At first, everything went according to plan. The path was narrow but clearly used. There were markers nailed to trees every few hundred meters, small rectangles of paint in green and white. The woods were still. Tall pines and birches surrounded me, their trunks pale and straight. Occasionally, I'd pass a mushroom or a log covered in moss. It was quiet enough that I could hear my own breathing and the rustle of twigs underfoot. After maybe an hour, I came to a fork in the trail. My map showed a split, but the signpost was worn and crooked. The paint had faded. One arrow pointed up a hill, the other down into a thicker part of the forest. I hesitated, checked the map, then chose the upward path, figuring higher ground was easier to orient from. I walked for another 20 minutes before I started to feel uneasy. The trail looked less worn. No recent footprints. The trees were packed tighter, and there were no more trail markers. I backtracked a little, but couldn't find the last painted sign. I was still calm, still sure I could retrace my steps. Then I realized my phone had no service. It wasn't a huge surprise. The cabin had only 1 bar of signal, and that was when I stood on the porch. Still, it made me uneasy. I looked at the printed map again. I could see roughly where I was. I figured if I looped back toward the stream marked on the lower trail, I could cut across and rejoin the main path. It sounded simple enough, but the deeper I went, the more disoriented I felt. Nothing around me looked familiar. The terrain dipped and twisted in ways the map didn't show. The forest floor was uneven, full of roots and muddy patches. I was sweating now. The air felt thick. My legs started to ache. I told myself to keep calm, pick a direction, and stick to it. South, I decided. I had a small compass app on my phone, and it still worked without signal. South should lead me back toward the road. But the further I walked, the more lost I became. The forest here was dense. The undergrowth thickened. At one point, I stepped into what looked like a clear patch and found myself ankle deep in cold mud. I pulled my foot out, cursing, soaked and tired. My water was half gone. I started calling out, hoping maybe someone else was nearby. Nothing answered me. No voices. Just wind in the trees and the far-off creak of branches. By mid-afternoon, I knew I was in trouble. My legs were burning. I was walking in circles. I passed the same leaning pine twice, recognized it by the bark stripped on one side. I cursed myself for not paying better attention, for traveling so light, for assuming this would be just another day hike. The light began to change. The clouds thickened overhead. The woods grew darker. I checked my phone again, still no signal, battery at 20%. I kept moving, though more slowly now. At one point, I came across a fallen log covered in moss and decided to sit. My feet were sore. I was starting to feel cold, despite all the walking. I chewed some of the trail mix, but my mouth was dry. That's when I heard a noise. Not an animal. A mechanical hum, faint and distant. It sounded like a car. I stood up fast, heart racing, and turned toward the sound. It was weak, fading in and out, but definitely real. I pushed through the undergrowth, stumbling on roots, scraping my arms. The noise got louder, then clearer. Not just a car, but tires on gravel. I broke through a thick patch of brush and saw a narrow road below, maybe 20 meters down a steep slope. A Forest Service road, probably. I scrambled down the hill, slipping on leaves, falling once, catching myself. When I reached the bottom, I stepped out onto the edge of the road, panting. My legs were trembling. No car in sight now. It must have passed already. Still, I was on a road. I turned left and started walking. I didn't know which direction led to the main road, but any direction was better than the trees. After maybe half an hour of walking, I heard another engine. This time, a truck came into view, a dark green forestry vehicle. I stepped into the open and waved both arms. It stopped. A man stepped out, middle-aged, in uniform. I said hello, but he didn't understand. I tried a few simple English words, lost trail car. He nodded slowly, then gestured for me to follow him. He drove me down the road, and after maybe 10 minutes, we reached a ranger outpost. There were 2 other staff there. None of them spoke fluent English, but they gave me water, sat me down, and after a few minutes of trying, one of them called a younger man from a nearby village who could translate. The translator arrived half an hour later. He was probably in his 20s, and his English was good. I explained what had happened. He nodded, then told the rangers. They didn't seem surprised. He said people got lost in those woods now and then. The trails were old, not always well maintained. They gave me a ride back to the gravel lot where I'd left my rental car. I must have walked miles off a marked path. It was already dark by the time I got there. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before I turned the engine on. I didn't feel ready to move yet. My hands were shaking a little. I made it back to the cabin around 9 that night. I didn't eat dinner. I showered, lay down, and stared at the ceiling. It could have gone very differently. If I hadn't heard that car, if I turned the wrong way on that slope, if I'd panicked and wandered deeper in. I think about that a lot. Since then, I haven't gone hiking without a real compass, a first aid kit, and a backup battery for my phone. I download offline maps. I'll let someone know where I'm going and when I'll be back. Getting lost out there didn't feel like a story. It felt like a slow, creeping realization that I was entirely alone in a place that didn't care whether I made it out or not. But I did, just barely, and I won't forget it. We thought it would be a good idea to take a walk through the reserve before heading home. It had been a long weekend trip with my wife and our 2 kids, 10 and 13 years old. The cabin we rented was a short drive from a wildlife area we read about online. Mostly forest, a few streams, and marked trails, nothing too rugged. We were looking for one last quiet walk before the long drive back. The trail was supposed to be a short loop, 3 miles through some low forest ridges and then back to the parking area. We packed light, water bottles, a couple granola bars, sunscreen. I had my phone, but I turned it to airplane mode to save battery. The signal out here was spotty anyway. It was warm, early spring, a little humid. Birds were everywhere. We started around mid-morning. The trail was soft underfoot, lots of pine needles and damp leaves. I remember thinking how peaceful it all was. The kids were ahead, pointing at mushrooms and weird trees. My wife was behind me, snapping photos. About a mile in, the trail thinned a bit. Not overgrown, but tighter. More brush on either side. At some point, we passed a little wooden marker. It was cracked, and whatever had been painted on it was faded away. That should have made me think twice, but I didn't. It happened fast. I heard it first. A rustling sound, low and heavy, somewhere to the right, deeper in the brush. I stopped walking and looked toward the trees. Something big moved, maybe 50 feet away. Then I saw it. A wild boar. Not just one. 3 of them. A huge adult and 2 smaller ones. They were brown and bristly, and the big one had thick tusks curving out from its snout. Its head was low, its eyes fixed on us. The young ones were sniffing around in the dirt behind it. I didn't need anyone to tell me what that meant. We'd stumbled into a nesting area. Before I could think, it charged. The sound was terrifying. Snorts, hooves pounding against the ground, branches snapping. I yelled, grabbed my kids, and ran left, off the trail into the thick brush. My wife was right behind me. We didn't stop running. We ducked branches, pushed past bushes, leapt over logs. I didn't know where we were going. I just wanted distance between us and that boar. I couldn't hear it anymore, but we didn't stop to check. Finally, after what felt like minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds, we stopped. Everyone was breathing hard. My hands were shaking. I looked around. Trees, brush, more trees. No trail in sight. We were off path. I told everyone to stay close and try to get my bearings. But nothing looked familiar. We hadn't gone far, but the forest looked different here. Denser. The undergrowth was thicker. We'd moved downhill, that much I knew. I pulled out my phone. 1 bar. No GPS look. I switched off airplane mode, hoping for better signal. It searched for a while, then went back to no service. I tried to stay calm. I told myself we just needed to head uphill, retrace our steps. The boars were long gone now, but when we turned around to backtrack, the brush looked even denser. It didn't feel like the same way we came. We started moving slowly, trying to loop back. Within 15 minutes, it was obvious we were guessing. Every direction we turned, the forest looked the same. We saw no trail. The trees were spaced unevenly. Some patches had thorns. Others had soft ground that sucked at our shoes. At one point, my younger kid tripped over a hidden root and scraped his knee. It bled a little, but nothing serious. I cleaned it with water and kept moving. It was hot now. The sun was high, but under the trees, the light was patchy. We walked for what felt like hours. No markers, no voices, just our footsteps and the occasional insect buzz. The kids stopped talking completely. My wife looked worried. We tried calling out now and then. Not for help exactly, just in case another hiker was nearby. But the woods stayed silent. We sat down around what looked like a dry creek bed and ate the granola bars. Drank some of the water. I split it up, trying to ration, but we hadn't brought much. Just enough for a short hike. Now it had to last longer. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. We kept moving after that, trying to stay in one direction. I marked trees with a stick, little notches in the bark. But it was clumsy and slow. The forest started to feel thicker again. More brush. The air felt heavier. Then we hit a wall of brambles, dense thorns blocking our way. We had to backtrack and go around. That pushed us off our line again. By late afternoon, we were exhausted. We found a flat patch of ground and stopped. Everyone was sweaty and sore. My legs ached. My wife's ankle was bothering her. She must have twisted it slightly. The kids were quiet, scared. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew we'd have to spend the night out here. I gathered sticks, made a pile near us. We didn't have matches or a lighter, but I figured if we could get some dry bark, maybe friction would do something. It didn't. I scraped sticks together until my palms stung, but nothing caught. The wood was damp. As darkness came, the sounds of the forest changed. Frogs, insects, distant rustles we couldn't identify. We huddled together. I kept the kids between us. My wife's breathing was shallow. No one slept much. It was cold, too. Not freezing, but enough to make us shiver. In the morning, we moved again. Stiff and sore, hungry and thirsty. The water was almost gone. I told everyone to sip it slowly. We started downhill again, thinking maybe we'd hit a road or a creek. After another hour, we heard something. Faint at first, then stronger. Running water. We followed the sound and reached a small stream. It curved through the trees, slow but steady. The water looked clean. I scooped some up in my hand. Cold, clear, no smell. We drank carefully, not too fast. Then I noticed something else. A plastic bag tangled in some branches near the edge of the water. Trash. That meant someone had been here. Hope lit up inside me. We followed the stream downstream, staying close but careful. After maybe an hour more, I saw something that made my heart jump. A bridge. Not a big one, just a narrow wooden footbridge crossing the stream. But next to it, a worn path. Gravel and packed dirt. We stepped onto the trail, and I recognized it immediately. It was part of the reserve loop. The main part. We must have been on the far end. It still took another hour to reach the trailhead, but at least we were back in familiar ground. I recognized a bench, then the parking lot in the distance. When we reached the car, we dropped our bags and just stood there. I looked at the trees one more time, thick and quiet, and shook my head. We made it out. No injuries, no disasters. But we were lucky. If we'd wandered further, missed that stream, it could have been a lot worse. Since that day, I don't hike without a map, a compass, a proper first aid kit, and a small pack, even on short trails. I never assume it'll be just a quick walk, because I've learned how fast nature can turn against you. How quickly a peaceful hike can turn into something else entirely. It was supposed to be a quick hike, just a short loop before lunch. I didn't even pack a bag. The weather was perfect. Clear sky, light breeze, maybe 65 degrees. I had on trail runners, shorts, a light long-sleeve shirt, and my phone in my pocket. I brought a small bottle of water, those little half-liter ones, and stuffed 2 granola bars in my jacket pocket just in case. I figured I'd be out 2 hours tops. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I wasn't far from town. What could happen? I'd read about the trail online. It was called the Copper Ridge Loop, about 4 miles total with a nice view halfway through. The description said it was well marked and maintained. Family friendly. It started at a pull-off the main road, just a little dirt patch with space for maybe 3 cars. When I parked, I didn't see anyone else. That felt like a bonus. Quiet, peaceful. Just me and the trail. The start of the trail was easy. Wide dirt path, soft pine needles underfoot, gentle incline. I walked fast, enjoying the quiet. The only sounds were birds and my footsteps. I drank a little water, took a few photos with my phone. Everything looked so calm. I was moving quick, maybe too quick, but I felt good. About a mile in, the trail narrowed a bit, twisting through thicker trees. I passed a few faded trail markers nailed to trees. Orange ones, rectangle-shaped. I followed them without much thought. It all seemed obvious. The path was clear, and it was still early. I didn't check my phone. I figured I'd be back to my car well before noon. That's when I missed the turn. I didn't realize it at first. The trail just sort of thinned. I thought maybe it was just overgrown. I stepped around some fallen branches, ducked under a low limb, and kept going. The ground was harder here, rockier, with fewer signs of footprints. But it still looked like a path, or something close to one. I kept going, thinking maybe the view was close. 10 minutes later, I knew something was off. There were no more trail markers. The trees were different, taller, spaced wider. The ground had changed, drier. with more loose rock and brush. I stopped walking and stood still for the first time in a while. I looked around. Nothing looked familiar. I turned around to retrace my steps, but the path I'd come down didn't look like much of a path anymore. It just looked like forest. Still, I walked back the way I thought I came. But every time I picked a direction and moved, things started to blur. Trees repeating, rock formations that looked the same. I started to wonder if I'd veered off even further trying to backtrack. I stopped again and drank the rest of my water. My mouth was dry. My heart was beating fast. I pulled out my phone. 1 bar. I tried opening the GPS, but the screen loaded slowly. Then it froze. I waited, tried refreshing. Nothing. I walked a few feet, checked again. Still nothing. Eventually, the screen just went black. I stood there and looked at the trees. The light was changing now. Still mid-morning, but deeper in the woods, the shadows started to stretch. The breeze had stopped. The air felt warmer. I peeled off my jacket and tied it around my waist. I could feel sweat on my back. I picked a direction and started walking again. I told myself I'd find a trail, but it had a loop back. I couldn't have gone far, but minutes turned into an hour, then maybe more. I had no watch and my phone was still dead. The sun was high, but I couldn't tell which way was west. Every direction looked the same. Trees, rocks, brush. I ate one of the granola bars. It was dry and stuck to my teeth. My stomach ached, but not from hunger, more from nerves. A low, twisting feeling that didn't go away. The longer I walked, the less sense everything made. I crossed the same dry creek bed 3 times, or maybe they were different ones. It was hard to tell. My feet were sore. My shoes had picked up pebbles and dust. The inside of my mouth was sticky. I started looking for water, just in case, but the creeks were all dry. By afternoon, I was fully lost. I sat down on a flat rock and leaned forward, elbows on my knees, trying to think. The forest was dead quiet. No birds now, just the buzz of occasional insects and the wind, soft and irregular. The light shifted between the branches above me, and I started to notice the buzzing in my ears, something that only happens when I'm really dehydrated. I spat into the dirt and saw how thick it was. Like glue. I needed water. Real water. I got up and started walking again, this time downhill. I figured that was the best chance. Water flows down. People build roads near rivers. That's what I remembered reading once. So I moved slowly, carefully, keeping my eyes open. But going downhill brought new problems. Loose dirt, more rocks. I slipped twice, once landing hard on my elbow. It throbbed for a while, but didn't seem broken. Still, I moved slower after that. It was early evening when I found the stream. I almost missed it, just a thin trickle in a shaded ravine. The water pooled in a shallow bend, barely an inch deep. I dropped to my knees and stared at it for a while. It wasn't moving fast, just a slow, murky trail. But I was desperate. I cupped my hands and drank. It tasted like dirt and metal and leaves. It wasn't cold, but it was wet, and it filled my mouth. I drank until I felt sick. Then I sat back, wiped my mouth, and stayed there. My head was pounding. I knew drinking unfiltered water was risky, but I had no choice. As the sun dropped lower, I started thinking about what to do next. I couldn't keep walking in circles. I had no gear, no flashlight, no food left, no cell signal. I had to accept that I'd spend the night out here. I found a small cluster of trees with flat ground and a thick bed of dry needles. I cleared a spot, built a little wall of branches around the base of one tree, and sat with my back against it. The light faded slowly. The forest turned gray, then black. I pulled my arms inside my shirt and hugged my knees. Every sound around me felt louder now. Cracks in the brush, leaves rustling. Once, something snapped nearby and I froze. But nothing came. The cold set in hard after that. I hadn't noticed how much the temperature had dropped. My legs were shaking, my fingers stiff. I curled tighter and tried not to fall asleep, worried I'd wake up even colder, or not at all. I don't think I slept that night. Just drifted in and out of shallow dozes, heart racing every time I heard a new sound. My body hurt all over. My mouth was dry again. My thoughts kept circling the same questions. How far had I gone? Would anyone come looking? The next morning, I drank from the stream again. My stomach cramped after, but I didn't care. I forced myself to stand and started walking. This time, I followed the stream downhill. Even if it wasn't much, it gave me a line to follow. Hours passed. The sun was high again. My feet ached. I could feel blisters now, one on each heel. I walked slowly, careful not to twist an ankle. The brush thickened again. I kept checking behind me to make sure I wasn't circling. Once I found an old soda can half buried in leaves. That gave me hope. If someone had been here, there had to be a way out. Around late afternoon, I heard something. A low, steady sound, distant at first, then clearer. Engines. I froze, listened, then moved toward it. Fast as I could. Climbing a small ridge nearly tore the muscles in my thighs. But once I got over it, I saw it. A road, 2 lanes, cracked and sun-faded, with a guardrail and a mile marker. I nearly cried. I stumbled down the hill and waved as a car passed. It didn't stop, but a second one did. It was an older man in a pickup. He didn't ask questions, just pointed to the passenger seat. I got in, legs cramping, throat dry. He handed me a bottle of water and drove me straight to the ranger station. They cleaned me up, asked for the trail name, and shook their heads. Apparently, I'd wandered 7 miles off course. Missed a split in the trail where a marker had fallen during storm. They said it happened sometimes, but I was lucky. They called it minor exposure. No serious injuries, but if I'd been out one more night, I probably would have needed real medical care. I nodded. I didn't say much, just drank more water and thought about how stupid I'd been. Going light, no map, no backup, no one knowing where I'd gone. Now, every time I hike, I pack like I'm not coming back that day. Even for short trails. Water, food, map, compass, flashlight, layers. I tell someone where I'm going. I double-check the trailhead, because I know now how fast things can go wrong. How quick a quiet hike turns into a survival story. How close I came to not walking out at all. I could feel the ache in my arches long before I looked down at my feet. My boots had started rubbing raw spots along my heels, and the bandage I wrapped earlier was soaked with sweat, already peeling off. I didn't need to check to know the skin underneath had torn. Every step stung, but stopping made it worse, made the throbbing return in full force. So I kept going. Step, sting, throb, The trail had turned to gravel a while ago, then narrowed into packed dirt and loose stones. Branches brushed my arms, and the canopy thickened above. I kept telling myself we were close, that the parking area had to be just around the bend or over the next ridge. I believed that for a while. Now, I wasn't so sure. It had started out fine, really. I checked the map at the trailhead, took a photo with my phone, and followed the orange marker through the woods. The plan was to loop back before sundown. But somewhere along the way, maybe at that last fork where the marker was cracked and half-faded, I must have chosen the wrong path. This one looked worn in enough to seem right. Why at first? Clearly used. It even had tire tracks, like it was an old Forest Service road. That was probably what made me trust it. The tracks, the width, the fact that it felt like a way out, not deeper in. I thought it would connect to the main trail or loop around to the parking lot. But it didn't. It just kept going, winding deeper into the hills, climbing, falling, then climbing again. And still no signs. No markers, no junctions, no sound of cars in the distance. Just forest. I hadn't seen another person in hours. Earlier in the day, I passed a few hikers going the opposite direction, all cheerful and quick-paced. Now I couldn't even hear birds. The forest had that heavy quiet, the kind that makes you realize how far you've come and how alone you really are. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. Battery at 19%. I hadn't taken a power bank because it was supposed to be a half-day hike. In and out before late afternoon. I'd packed a light lunch, the granola bar, 2 bottles of water. That was it. No tent. No sleeping bag. Not even a flashlight. It was already past 6. The light had started to shift. It wasn't dark yet, but the sun was definitely sinking. Trees cast longer shadows, and everything looked colder somehow. The green had gone from warm and mossy to dull and dry. A wind had picked up, whispering through the upper branches and brushing my sweat-soaked shirt against my skin. My shirt clung to me. My backpack straps dug into my shoulders, soaked through and chafing. I wanted to sit, to rest, but every time I stopped, the fear crept up. The kind that starts small, like a chill, then fills your chest until it's hard to breathe. So I kept moving. Forward. Always forward. Because maybe the next bend would show the road. Maybe the next clearing would have a sign. Maybe someone would drive by. But the trail got narrower. Eventually, it didn't feel like a road at all. Just two faint lines in the dirt, half covered in pine needles, barely wide enough for a car. And even those started to fade. At one point, I stopped and looked around. The forest had closed in on me. The trees were tighter, the undergrowth denser. The road was more memory than path now. I looked back. The way I came was no better than the way ahead. There was no real trail anymore, just the impression of one, and even that was slipping away. My mind told me to go back, retrace my steps, but I couldn't trust that either. What if I'd already taken a wrong turn miles ago? What if going back meant getting even more lost? So I kept forward. I checked the time. 6:42 p.m. Light was fading faster now. The shadows were darker, the air cooler. I took a sip of my water. One bottle was already gone. The second was warm, sloshing thinly. I took the smallest sip I could and screwed the cap on tight. No idea how long it would need to last. I kept walking. My feet had started to burn now. Not just sharp stings, but a deep, dull fire that pulsed with every step. I limped more than walked. My calves were tight. My back ached. I could feel the edge of panic creeping in, that thin, sharp voice that whispered, "You're not getting out of here tonight." But I ignored it. Had to. Eventually, I reached a small rise. The trees broke slightly at the top, and I thought I might see something. A road. A cabin. Anything. I scrambled up, almost running, lungs burning, heart thudding. But there was nothing. Just more trees. Hills folding into other hills. No power lines. No fences. No signs of life. Just a dull, endless sea of green. That was when I felt it fully. The wrongness. I wasn't on a trail anymore. I was on something old, something forgotten. Maybe it used to be a service road, but it hadn't been used in years. No fresh tire marks. No boot prints. No trash. No sign of anyone. It hit me all at once. This wasn't connected to the main trail at all. I sat down. Just dropped right there in the dirt, legs stretched out, the pack slipping from my shoulders with a hard thunk. I pulled my boots off slowly. My socks came with them, stuck to the raw skin beneath. The blisters were worse than I thought. One on each heel had popped, the skin white and torn. Blood soaked into the heel of one sock. I wrapped them with gauze from my first aid kit, the cheap kind that barely stuck, and pulled the boots back on, wincing. Then I looked at the sky. Still light, but only just that pale, silver blue of early dusk. Maybe 40 minutes left before full dark. I stood up, forced myself to keep going. Limping now, slower than before, head low, arms heavy. The forest seemed to press in harder, like the trees were leaning closer, branches reaching down. Every sound made me flinch. The rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, a bird taking off. Nothing threatening, but it all made me more aware of how alone I was. How far from help. Eventually, the road, if you could still call it that, dipped into a ravine. The air got colder there. The trail became muddy, slick with runoff from an old stream that ran along the side. I slipped twice. The second time I went down hard, scraping my palm on a stone. I lay there for a second, stunned, dirt in my mouth, hand bleeding. Then I got back up. The pain was just part of it now. Background noise. And then, just when I thought I couldn't go any farther, I saw something ahead. A pole. Faded wood. Crooked. Barely standing. But man-made. I hurried toward it. It was a trail marker. Weathered. Old. The paint almost gone. But it was something. And behind it, barely visible through the trees, was a clearer path. Wider. Worn. Flat. I don't know what made me choose left instead of right. Just instinct. Or hope. Or the wind. But I turned left and followed it. I couldn't tell you how long I walked. Could have been minutes. Could have been an hour. Time didn't feel real anymore. But eventually I saw something else. A fence. Wooden, broken in places, but running in a straight line along the ridge. I followed it. And then, in the distance, through a break in the trees, I saw it. A roof. Gray. Slanted. Tin. I nearly cried. It was a ranger shed. Old. Boarded up. But beside it was a gravel lot. And beside that, glory of all glories, a real road. Paved. Faded paint lines. Empty, but real. I stumbled toward it, past the shed, down the slope, boots scraping on loose rock. I reached the road and dropped to my knees. Then I stood, looked both ways, and started walking. 10 minutes later, I heard a car. I almost didn't believe it at first. Just stood there listening, but then it rounded the bend. A dusty pickup. I stepped into the road and waved. The driver stopped, rolled down the window, said something I didn't catch. I just nodded, pointed back toward the woods. He opened the passenger door. I got in. The ride was quiet, warm. I watched the forest roll past the window and let myself breathe for the first time in hours. He dropped me at the trailhead, where my car sat alone, windows reflecting the orange-pink sky. I thanked him, opened the door, sat down. The pain rushed in all at once, but I didn't care. I was out. I was safe. And I would never, ever trust an unmarked trail again. It started as a perfect morning, the kind where the sunlight cuts through the leaves just right, and the air smells like pine and damp soil. We were 3 days into a 5-day hike through the national forest. Me, my brother Jake, and my cousin Nina. We planned it for months. The route was meant to be a loop, marked clearly on the map, following a mix of ranger trails and backcountry paths. We had gear, food, bear spray, and enough confidence to think we were in control. That morning, everything felt calm. We packed up our tents, filtered water from a nearby stream, and started walking. We were a few hours into the day when we saw it. A patch of the trail ahead was disturbed. Mud turned up, tufts of hair on a low branch, a broken log with claw marks deep into its flesh. We didn't say anything, just stared. We all knew what it meant. A bear, a big one. We scanned around. Trees stood quiet. The forest had gone still in a way that made my skin prickle. Usually, you could hear birds or rustling somewhere, but now there was nothing. I felt the air get heavier. Jake knelt to look closer, then stood quickly and motioned to turn back. That's when Nina spotted it. Across a dip in the trees, maybe 40 yards off the trail, a dark shape moved. Slowly, broad shoulders, thick fur, and a low, heavy step. A black bear, but large. Too close. We didn't run. We knew better. We stepped off the trail the opposite way, slow and controlled, trying to put trees between us and the bear. We kept walking, weaving between trees. After 10 minutes, we couldn't hear or see it anymore. But the trail was gone. We'd veered off further than we thought. Jake pulled out the map and compass, turning circles. Nina was breathing fast, hands twitchy. I tried to focus. "Let's head east," Jake finally said. The map showed a fire road a few miles that way. We started walking, pushing through undergrowth. Branches slapped our faces. Fallen logs slowed us down. It was hard to keep a straight path. We had no GPS signal. The sky was clouding over, and the light started to dull early. By late afternoon, we hadn't found anything. No road, no trail. Just trees. Thick, damp, and endless. We stopped to rest. Our water was low. We'd expected to refill at a stream that was now out of reach. My legs ached. Nina sat on her pack, eyes red. Jake paced in a slow circle. We had to make a choice. Set up camp and wait for morning, or keep moving and hope to stumble on something. The map was old, 5 years at least. Trails might have changed. We decided to move until dusk. Another hour passed. Still nothing. No sound of water, no sign of clearing. It felt like the forest was closing in. The trees were taller here, the canopy thicker. It got darker faster. My head throbbed. I didn't realize I was dehydrated until I stood up and staggered. We camped that night in a hollow between two boulders. No fire. Didn't want to draw attention from anything. We ate a few bites of trail mix, sipped what little water we had left. The night was long. I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt amplified. The snapping of twigs, the shuffle of wind through brush. I thought about the bear, whether it had circled around, whether we were being watched. At dawn, we packed and moved. Bodies sore, nerves frayed. Jake thought he recognized a slope from the map. We followed him. Hours passed. Still nothing. We were officially lost. We started yelling sometimes, hoping someone, anyone, might hear. No response. That afternoon, we spotted a sign. Half buried, old, rusted. It pointed nowhere we recognized. The words were barely legible. We followed it anyway. Anything was better than wandering aimlessly. It led us downhill. Steep, uneven ground. I slipped once, cutting my hand. Blood smeared my fingers. Nina helped wrap it with a strip of her shirt. We pressed on. Finally, we saw a clearing. A wide patch of flattened earth. And, just beyond, a dry creek bed. It wasn't salvation, but it was something. We followed the creek, hoping it would lead to water. It did eventually. A slow trickle at first, then a stream. We filtered what we could, drank in silence. That night, we camped again. At least we had water. The next morning, things changed. We heard voices. Faint, distant. Shouted names. We screamed back. Again and again. Then quiet. No reply. It was cruel, like hope being yanked away. But later that day, just before noon, we heard the sound of an engine. A low, growling hum. We followed it, running now. Scrambling. Shouting. Then people. Rangers. A search party. They'd been looking for us for 2 days. Someone had reported us missing when we didn't check in. They'd found our trail, found our campsite, and fanned out. We were miles off course. When they let us out, I cried. I didn't even feel it happening. Just tears and shaking knees. My body had held it all in for too long. Back at the station, we sat in silence. Wrapped in blankets, drinking warm things. I stared at the map on the wall. Our trail was marked, but the area where we'd gone? Blank. No trails. No notes. Just forest. The ranger said that part had been closed years ago. Trail, erosion. Bear activity. Unsafe. We never should have gone off trail. But in that moment, it felt like the only choice. Sometimes, I still hear the silence of that forest. The absence of birds. The weight of branches above. I don't think I'll hike again. At least, not out there. Not where the trees press close, and one wrong step turns the woods into a maze you can't walk out of. It started like any other trip. We had driven out to a national forest about 2 hours from home. Me, my brother Ryan, and my sister-in-law Claire. It was early September, and the air was dry and hot. There hadn't been much rain that summer, but the forest still looked green enough from the road. We planned a 2-day hike, just a loop that would take us up through some ridges, down into a valley, and back out along a stream. It didn't seem too difficult. We had done longer trails before. We parked the car at the trailhead just before noon, packed up our bags with food, water, and gear, and headed into the woods. The trail was wide at first, and we passed a couple other hikers heading out. I remember seeing a sign nailed to a post, something about elevated fire risk. I barely glanced at it. Warnings like that are always there. It didn't seem urgent. We weren't planning to make a fire or camp off trail, so we just kept walking. The first few hours were easy. We followed the path up into a pine-covered ridge, where we stopped to rest and eat lunch. I remember the breeze felt warm, but not alarming. There was no smell of smoke, no haze in the air, just dry needles underfoot, the distant creak of trees in the wind, and the hum of insects. We sat on a rock outcropping and looked down over the valley we planned to cross. Everything looked peaceful. We kept moving, heading down into the lower stretch of the forest. The trees got denser, the light dimmed, and the path narrowed. It felt cooler under the shade. I remember feeling relaxed. We weren't in any rush, just walking and talking, taking photos now and then. That's probably why we didn't notice it right away. It started small, just a faint change in the air, like the smell of a campfire far away. I caught it first. At first, I thought maybe someone had made a fire legally. But we hadn't seen anyone since lunchtime, and there was no sign of smoke. I kept walking, but the smell got stronger. More than just with smoke, it had that dry, sour edge, the kind of smell that makes your throat itch a little. That was when Claire stopped and pointed up. Through a break in the trees, we could see a haze starting to roll over the ridge behind us. Not thick, but enough to blur the line between trees and sky. That was the first rail warning bell. We didn't have signal. None of us. We checked our phones and got the same thing. No bars, no data. No way to check the news, no alerts. Just us, the trail, and that slowly thickening air. We didn't know where the fire was, how close it had started, or which way it was moving. We only knew the wind was coming from the west, and so was the smoke. We stopped walking and stood there listening. I think we all hoped we'd hear a helicopter, or maybe voices, or something that meant other people were around. But there was nothing, just wind in the branches. We pulled out the map and tried to figure out our location. We had maybe 6 miles to go before the loop would take us back toward the car. But that path would bring us through the heart of the valley before climbing up again. The smoke drifted closer, curling low through the trees. Not thick enough to choke us yet, but enough to change the light. Everything started looking orange and brown. The sun filtered down like through stained glass. It felt wrong. We decided to turn back, follow the trail back to the ridge. It was longer than cutting through the valley, but it was higher ground, and we thought it would give us a better view of what was coming. It felt like the safer bet. We moved quickly, no longer talking, just walking hard uphill. The air got thicker. My mouth felt dry, and my tongue tasted bitter. I tried not to cough. Sweat soaked through my shirt, and my pack felt twice as heavy. Every so often we stopped and listened, trying to hear if the fire was near. Still nothing but wind. We reached the ridge about an hour later. From the top, we could see more of the valley, and that's when it hit us. A thick column of smoke was rising behind the trees to the southwest, and it wasn't slow. You could see it moving, rolling like waves, turning the sky gray and red. The wind picked up and carried ash with it. Tiny flakes drifted through the air and landed on our sleeves. It wasn't just far off. It was moving. We couldn't go back the way we came. That much was clear. We were cut off. The fire was coming up through the valley, and the trailhead was on the other side. Going forward meant walking toward it. We stood there on the ridge, looking down at the map again. There were no clear options. No roads, no emergency exit routes marked. Just forest in every direction. Claire said we needed to find a stream or river. Something wide enough to give us breathing room. Ryan pointed out a blue line on the map, Lookout Creek. It was a couple of miles northeast, running through a narrow canyon. We didn't know what it looked like, if it was flowing this time of year, or how fast we could get there, but it was something. We started walking toward it, veering off the trail. That was the worst part, leaving the trail. It felt like letting go of safety, but the wind was stronger now, and the smoke got heavier. We couldn't see more than a couple 100 feet in any direction. The trees swayed. Branches cracked. I kept looking back, expecting to see flames any second. We moved fast, pushing through underbrush, stumbling over roots and rocks. The ground dropped steeply in places, and we had to slide down loose dirt, grabbing at branches to keep from falling. My hand got scratched. My knees ached. We stopped only to drink small sips of water. We didn't have much left. After what felt like forever, we heard water. Faint at first, just a trickle, but real. We followed the sound, pushing harder now. And finally we found it. Lookout Creek. More of a narrow stream than a river, but it flowed fast and clear through the trees. It wasn't wide enough to stop a fire, not really, but it gave us something, a line to follow, cleaner air, a break in the trees. We walked along the creek for hours. Sometimes we stepped into the water itself, wading ankle deep through the cold current to avoid brush. The smoke stayed with us. The light turned strange and dim. Once or twice, we thought we saw flickers of orange far behind us. That pushed us harder. The hours blurred together. I stopped checking the time. We were just moving, always moving, with smoke above us and ash in our hair. My legs hurt. My shoulders burned from the straps of the pack. At one point, Claire stumbled and twisted her ankle, but she kept going without a word. No one complained. There was nothing to say. Eventually, near nightfall, we came to a service road. It was narrow, overgrown, clearly not used much, but it was something. We climbed up from the creek, covered in mud and soot, and stood on gravel. I've never been so happy to see a dirt road. It ran east, and we followed it. Not long after dark, we saw lights. Faint and far off at first, then closer. A truck. Fire rescue. We stepped into the headlights, waving our arms, too tired to shout. The driver slammed on the brakes. A man jumped out, wide-eyed, shouting something we couldn't hear. They took us in the truck, gave us water, and drove us out. We passed other vehicles, fire engines, utility trucks, emergency crews. The road wound away from the fire, and for the first time all day, I let myself breathe. We were lucky. Later, we found out that the fire had been sparked by lightning the night before and spread fast. It covered thousands of acres in 2 days. Parts of the trail we planned to take were gone, burned through completely. If we had gone into the valley like we first planned, we wouldn't have made it out. I still think about that trip. Not just the fear, but the helplessness of not knowing. No signal, no alerts, no direction. Just instincts. And how fast everything changed, from peaceful woods to smoke and panic in less than an afternoon. I check the fire risk signs now. I read the weather. I look for backup routes. I never rely on just one trail. Because once the wind changes, once the smoke starts rolling in, all you have is your feet and your judgment. And if either one fails, the forest doesn't care. It just keeps burning. I didn't think much of the time when we started the hike. The sun was still high, the air warm and golden, and the trail seemed manageable. Nothing technical, nothing that would take more than a couple of hours. It was supposed to be an easy late afternoon loop. We checked a map at the trailhead, picked a 5-mile circle through the woods, and brought a couple of small backpacks with water, snacks, and 2 flashlights, just in case. I figured we'd be back well before dark. We weren't amateurs. We'd hiked before. What I didn't think about, and what I'll never forget again, is how fast the sun can drop once it starts. One moment you're walking in daylight with birds calling and leaves glowing overhead, and the next, shadows stretch across the path and the light just disappears. We were a couple of miles in when I first noticed the change. The trees looked darker. The air cooled. The sound of insects began to rise, louder than before. I checked my phone for the time and realized it was already past 6:30. Sunset was closer than I'd expected. Still, I figured we had time. An hour of light, maybe more. We picked up the pace. The trail had markers, bright orange rectangles nailed to trees, but they weren't always easy to see. And as the light dimmed, they became even harder to spot. We followed the path as best we could, moving faster now, trying to make it out of the thicker part of the forest before the sun vanished. But the trail seemed to stretch longer than it should have. I started wondering if we'd missed a turn, if maybe one of the forks hadn't been marked clearly. I pulled the printed map from my back pocket and tried to match it with where we were, but everything looked the same, tree after tree, slope after slope, all blending together. When the sun finally dropped behind the trees, it felt sudden. 1 second, we were still moving in the dim light, and the next it was dark. Not just dark, but forest dark, heavy and deep and full of movement. The kind of dark that pulls your attention in every direction, makes your heart race, even when nothing is happening. We stopped and pulled out the flashlights. The first one flickered before giving off a narrow, weak beam. The second worked better at first. I try not to panic. We kept walking, slowly now, careful to stay on what looked like the trail. But the shadows moved differently in the flashlight's narrow beam. Trees leaned toward us. Branches scratched at our arms. The ground felt uneven, twisted, like roots had grown into strange shapes while we weren't looking. I looked behind me a lot, checking to make sure we weren't walking in circles, though honestly, it all looked the same. My breath started to sound too loud in my ears. 10 minutes later, the stronger flashlight dimmed suddenly. I tapped it, shook it, hoping it was just a bad connection. It stayed on, but the beam dropped to a pale glow. The other one was already useless. I turned it off, trying to save what little power was left in the second. I told myself we were close. Maybe another half mile. Maybe less, but I couldn't be sure anymore. We kept walking, slow and careful. Every sound snapped my attention to it. An animal moving in the brush, a stick breaking underfoot, the wind pressing against the trees. My imagination started playing tricks. I kept thinking I saw someone ahead of us, a shape just beyond the beam of light. But every time I pointed the flashlight, it was just a stump or a crooked branch. I try not to let fear take over, but it crept in. I could feel it settling in my chest, turning each breath into something heavier. We came to a place where the trail split, but there were no markers. I looked both ways. The left side dropped into a small gully. The right looked flat. I picked the right. We walked for another 10 minutes before I realized it didn't look like a trail at all anymore. The ground sloped awkwardly. Rocks jutted from the soil. Fallen logs blocked the way. I stopped and turned in a circle, shining the light in every direction. No markers, no signs, nothing familiar. I felt the panic start to swell. We tried to backtrack, following what we thought was our own trail. But everything looked different in the dark. Our footprints weren't clear. The forest was too dense. The light was too weak. We stopped again. I pulled out the map, but it was useless in the dark. I couldn't read the lines, couldn't see the tiny labels. My phone still had a small charge, but there was no signal. I turned on the flashlight one last time, aimed it at the trees, and kept walking. We walked until we couldn't walk anymore. My legs hurt. My throat was dry. The light died finally completely. One blink and it was gone. I held the cold metal in my hand for a few more minutes, then shoved it in my pocket. We stood in the pitch black, surrounded by trees, and listened. It was the only thing we could do. The forest doesn't go quiet at night. Not really. It just changes. Instead of birds and wind, there are insects and rustlings and soft cracks and distant howls. I sat on a log and tried to breathe normally. Try not to think about how easy it would be to walk in the wrong direction, to move farther away from the trail instead of closer to it. We decided not to move anymore. There was no point stumbling blindly. We'd wait until morning. I knew that was the smart thing, but it didn't make it easier. Sitting in the dark forest with no light, no sense of direction, and no certainty that we'd even be able to find the trail again in daylight. It wasn't easy. Every time a twig snapped nearby, I flinched. Every time I closed my eyes, I opened them again just to make sure nothing had changed. But of course, I couldn't see anything either way. We didn't sleep. Not really. Just sat close together, knees drawn up, trying to keep warm. The night felt endless. Time stretched. Every minute dragged. I watched the stars through breaks in the canopy, waiting for any sign of light. Finally, just before dawn, the sky began to shift. Not much at first, just a soft graying between the trees, but enough to tell me the sun was coming. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken in hours. As the light grew, the forest changed again. The shadows lifted. Shapes returned to normal. The path, or what we hoped was the path, became visible. We started walking as soon as we could see. We moved slowly at first, careful, scanning every tree for the orange markers. And then, after maybe 20 minutes, we found one. Faded, a little crooked but real. Nailed into a thick pine, its edges rusted. I touched it like it was a lifeline. From there, we followed the trail back. We passed the fork we'd taken the night before and saw where we'd gone wrong. The gully on the left had hidden the real path in shadow, just enough to confuse us. If we'd taken it, we'd have been out before dark. That knowledge hit me hard. By the time we reached the trailhead, the parking lot was mostly empty. Morning light spilled over the gravel. Our car sat where we left it, quiet and still. I opened the door and sat down hard, the seat warmer than I expected. I didn't speak. I just sat there and let it sink in. We were lucky. That's the truth. We made a mistake. Underestimated time, overestimated our gear, and we paid for it in fear and hours of darkness. It could have been worse. If we kept walking, if we'd fallen, if we'd gotten turned around more than we did, it could have ended differently. But it didn't. Now I triple check everything. I plan for double the daylight we need. I carry backup batteries, and I never, ever start a hike without thinking about how long it'll take to get back. The memory of that night, of the flashlight dying, of standing in the dark woods surrounded by nothing but noise and fear, still sticks with me. It always will, because it taught me how fast the woods can change, how quickly control can disappear, and how terrifying it is to realize you no longer know where you are. It was supposed to be a calm day, just a short family hike through the woods. Nothing too far, nothing we hadn't done before. We picked a spot about an hour's drive away, a park with marked trails and a few picnic areas near a small lake. It wasn't deep wilderness. There were signs, maps, trash cans at every trailhead. We were going out to survive in the wild. We were just stretching our legs, spending time together. My wife and I had gone over the route the night before. It was a 5-mile loop with some elevation, but mostly smooth ground, well maintained. I brought the essentials: water, snacks, phone with a full charge, first aid kit, a printed copy of the trail map. I wasn't worried. The trail started out easy. We walked side by side at first, the kids running ahead and then falling back to us. Leaves rustled underfoot. Birds moved through the branches overhead. It was mid-morning, not too hot, not too cold. My wife and I talked as we walked, mostly about nothing. The kind of light talk that comes when you're relaxed and the world feels far away. The trail curved gently through the trees, up and down small hills, across wooden bridges over narrow creeks. Everything felt normal. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how simple. I don't even know when exactly it happened. That's the part that haunts me the most. One second we were together, and the next gone. We stopped for a break about 2 miles in, near a small clearing where a fallen tree made a good bench. The kids wandered a bit while we sat and passed around granola bars. They didn't go far, just a few feet off the trail to look at a bird or pick up a rock. My wife pointed out something in the trees, a squirrel or a bird. I can't remember. I stood to look. We turned for maybe 30 seconds. That was it. When I turned back, the kids weren't there. I stood still, trying not to panic. I scanned the trees, the trail. I called their names. My wife stood up beside me, looking in the other direction. At first I thought maybe they were just behind a bush, chasing something, playing. I walked up the trail a few steps, then back down. Nothing. No sound, no laughter, no rustling. Just still trees and the wind moving through the leaves. We split up briefly, each checking one side of the trail. Still nothing. I dropped my pack and ran 50 yards up the trail yelling. Then I turned and ran the other way. My wife's voice was tight when I got back to her. She said she hadn't seen them either. We stood together and called louder this time, over and over. There was no answer. I looked at the ground, trying to see footprints, anything out of place. But the trail was scattered with leaves and twigs. Nothing stood out. We didn't know which way they went. There was a split in the trail just past where we'd stopped, and I realized that if they'd wandered just a bit and taken the wrong side, they could be far away already. I looked at the map. One fork looped back eventually. The other went deeper and crossed more rugged ground before joining the loop again. My stomach tightened. We had a guess. We agreed to follow the deeper fork, hoping to catch up if they went that way. We started walking fast, calling as we went, stopping every couple minutes to listen. The farther we went, the more the trail twisted. There were other paths branching off, unofficial ones not on the map. We kept going. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. Still nothing. The forest felt different now. Sharper, like it was closing in. Every sound made me stop. Every shadow looked like it might be a person. I kept trying to remember the exact moment I lost sight of them, but I couldn't. It was like my brain had skipped it, like I blinked and missed it. We passed a muddy patch of trail where the dirt was soft enough to hold impressions. I dropped to my knees and scanned it. There were prints, but I couldn't be sure whose they were. Could have been anyone. Could have been us earlier in the day. We were sweating hard by then. My legs ached, but I didn't slow down. I kept thinking of all the stories I'd read. People getting lost in places they thought were safe, simple accidents turning into disasters. It didn't matter that we were just a few miles from the parking lot. If you take a wrong turn and keep walking, it doesn't take long to be completely turned around. I tried to stay calm, tried to keep my voice level when I called out again and again. Eventually, we came to a bend in the trail where it met a creek. I stopped there, breathing hard. The water was low, trickling through rocks and fallen branches. There were boot prints near the edge, smaller ones. I grabbed my wife's arm and pointed. We followed the creek for maybe a quarter mile. Then, on the far bank, I saw something red. A scrap of cloth caught on a low branch. I climbed across, got close. It was a piece of my son's jacket. I yelled again, louder, voice cracking. This time, faintly, I heard something. It wasn't clear, just a short, high sound, maybe a voice, maybe not. I turned toward it and ran, stumbling over roots and rocks, pushing branches aside. My wife was close behind. We yelled again, and this time we both heard it. Definitely a voice. High-pitched, a child's voice. We ran harder. I nearly fell more than once. Then we saw them. They were standing in a patch of sun near a large tree, both of them crying, arms around each other. My daughter saw us first and started running. I dropped to my knees and caught them both. My wife collapsed beside us, shaking. They were scared, tired, but unhurt. My son said they'd gone down a side trail to follow a bird and didn't realize we weren't behind them. When they turned back, everything looked different. They tried to retrace their steps, but ended up near the creek, too afraid to go any farther. They'd stayed put, eventually waiting, calling out. We sat there for a long time, just holding them. Then we checked the map again. The creek crossed one of the main trails near the south end of the loop. We followed it carefully, slowly, not letting go of them for a second. Every step back felt like a weight lifted. I kept thinking of what could have happened, how close we came to losing them. It was nearly sunset when we got back to the parking lot. The light was orange through the trees, and the sky was turning pink. I didn't speak on the drive home. My wife held both kids in the back seat while I stared at the road. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there listening to their breathing down the hall, thinking of how fast it all changed. One distraction, 1 second, that's all it took. We still go on hikes now, but never without walkie-talkies, GPS, strict rules about staying together. I don't care if it's a flat trail in a city park. I've learned how fast things can go wrong. I've learned what fear really feels like. Not the fear of being lost, but the fear of losing someone you love and not knowing if you'll ever see them again. That memory doesn't leave. I still see them standing by that tree, crying, holding each other. And every time I do, I remind myself, no more shortcuts, no more assumptions, no more chances. Because you don't always get lucky. We did. And I'll never forget how close we came to not. We started the hike in the morning, just after 7. The weather was overcast but calm, not too cold, not too humid. It was supposed to be a short trip, just a 6-mile loop through the valley, something we'd read about in a local travel blog. My wife had picked it because the area wasn't too crowded and the kids wanted something new, not the same trails we always walked. We packed snacks, enough water, warm layers in our packs, and I printed out the route from the website, just in case we lost signal. I double-checked the weather and it called for low clouds, maybe some mist in the afternoon, but no rain. I figured we'd be back to the car by early evening. I should have paid more attention to the elevation map. I didn't realize how deep the valley went, how quickly the trail would dip below the tree line and into something that felt like another world entirely. At first, everything was fine. The forest was quiet, and the trail was clear, with leaves and pine needles softening the steps. We passed a couple of small creeks, stepped across wet stones and fallen logs. There were markers nailed to trees every quarter mile or so, just painted circles, blue and white. The trees grew tighter the farther we went, but the path stayed visible. The kids walked ahead a bit. My wife stayed close behind. We took photos, paused at a few overlooks where the trail opened up to show cliffs and stretches of dark green across the valley walls. I could tell we were going lower and lower, but I didn't think anything of it. I just kept an eye on the time, thinking we'd be at the loop's halfway point by noon. The first sign something was wrong came just before noon. We were maybe 3 miles in the bottom part of the valley. The trail had started to flatten out, and we walked into a wide clearing surrounded by dense forest on all sides. The sun, what little we could see of it through the clouds, had dimmed even more. I noticed a thin mist clinging to the ground, curling around our boots as we walked. It thickened fast. Within 20 minutes, it wasn't just mist anymore. It was full fog. Dense, heavy fog that clung to the trees and filled the space between trunks like smoke. At first I thought it would lift. Fog usually burns off after a while, especially as the day warms up, but it didn't lift. It settled in deeper. Every few minutes it got harder to see more than a few feet ahead. The trees started to look the same. I slowed down, called everyone closer, told them to stay within arm's reach. I pulled the folded map from my back pocket and tried to match where we were. We should have been near a large bend in the trail where it curved back west toward a ridge. I looked for the ridge, but we couldn't see anything. It was all fog and trees. We walked slower, one step at a time. The trail started to fade beneath our feet. It had been clear earlier, dirt packed hard with occasional gravel and roots, but now it just blended into the forest floor. The fallen leaves made it harder to track. I stopped every few minutes to check my bearings, to turn slowly and try to pick out where we just come from. But everything looked the same. The trees were too close together, the fog too thick. I told myself not to panic, that the trail looped back around eventually, and if we just kept going forward, we'd find the other side. But the markers were gone. No blue blazes, no paint on trees, nothing. Just silence and the sound of our own footsteps. The fog dulled everything. It made it hard to tell time. It muted sound. so even the rustle of the forest felt distant. My son tripped over a rock he couldn't see, and we stopped to check his leg. No blood, just a scrape. My daughter asked if we were still on the trail. I didn't answer. I didn't want to lie. We sat for a while on a fallen tree, hoping maybe the fog would move if we stayed still. But it didn't. I checked my phone. No service. My wife's phone was the same. I held the map up and tried again to guess where we might be, but without the markers or landmarks, it was all guessing. I didn't want to backtrack in case we went even farther off course. So we picked a direction and moved forward. Every few minutes I'd stop and mark something behind us, scratched an arrow in the dirt, snapped a twig low to the ground, left a wrapper tied to a branch. Just something to tell if we were going in circles. It wasn't long before I noticed we weren't seeing any of our marks. We weren't going in circles, we were just going deeper. The fog didn't burn off. If anything, it got thicker as the afternoon went on. I started sweating, not from the heat, but from the tension. I felt like I had to pay attention to every single step, every shadow, every possible sign that we were still on the trail, but none came. The ground started to slope up again, but I couldn't tell if it was the right slope or just a hill we hadn't meant to climb. The kids got quieter. My wife looked pale, tired. We gave them the last of the granola bars. I told everyone to drink slowly, to save water. I kept checking the sky, but it never got brighter. Just that same gray sheet above our heads. We tried yelling, once just in case someone else was nearby, but the fog made it feel useless. Our voices didn't go anywhere. They felt like they were swallowed up a few feet away. I kept thinking we'd hear something, birds, animals, maybe a stream, but the silence never broke. It felt like we'd hiked into another layer of the world, one where nothing moved and nothing helped you find a way back. When it started getting dark, we stopped. We didn't want to move anymore without light. I dug a small space near a thick tree and cleared a patch of ground. We layered on clothes, put the kids between us to keep warm. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept imagining hearing things, kept seeing shapes in the fog, though I knew it was just trees and shadows. I kept trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, how I'd let this happen. I replayed the moment we lost the trail over and over. There wasn't one moment. It had just slipped away from us, quietly, like the fog itself. In the morning, the fog was still there. Not thinner, not lighter, just there. We stood up slowly, stretched stiff legs, and started walking again. I picked a direction that sloped down. I figured if we could get to the bottom of the valley, maybe find a creek we crossed the day before, we could follow it out. That was the only plan I had left. We walked for hours. My legs ached. My throat was dry. The kids were dragging their feet. I heard my wife breathing heavily behind me. Then, through the trees, I saw something different. A dark shape, straight lines. I thought maybe it was a hallucination, but as we got closer, I realized it was real. A post, then another. A trail sign. Wooden, old, cracked, but real. Faded paint carved into the wood. And a marker that said West Trailhead, 2.1 miles. It wasn't the same trail we'd started on, but it was a real trail. We followed it, every step slow and careful. The fog stayed, but now we had signs to follow. The trail was clearer, too. Packed earth gravel, and the farther we went, the more the ground rose, steadily, gradually. 2 miles never felt so long. Then, just before noon, we broke through the fog. It was like coming up for air. The sky was still gray, but lighter now. The fog stopped behind us, clinging to the trees like a curtain. Ahead was a parking area. Gravel. A single old truck parked near the edge. A dirt road winding down the hill. We made it out. I sat on the ground and didn't say anything for a long time. The kids laid down in the gravel. My wife leaned against the post and closed her eyes. Later, a ranger found us walking the road. He gave us water, made a call, and offered a ride back to our car, which was parked at a completely different trailhead more than 5 miles from where we ended up. He said the fog in that valley wasn't unusual. Locals knew about it, said it could roll in and stay for days sometimes. He said the trail maps online hadn't been updated in years. We didn't say much on the drive home. We were exhausted, but the image of that fog still sits in my mind. How it came in quietly and stayed, how it erased everything familiar, how it made the woods turn on us without a sound. I still hike, but I plan better now. I carry better gear. I check local reports, and I make sure I know exactly where every trail begins and ends. Because when the fog rolls in and all the landmarks disappear, all you have left is what you brought with you. We left the car just after 8 in the morning, parked off the side of a dirt pullout that branched off from the main service road. There was no ranger station, just a rusted metal sign with the trail name and a faded map behind foggy plexiglass. And even though it was half peeled away from water damage, I had a printed map in my pack, something I'd found online and saved a week before. I'd also marked a few notes in pen. Points of interest, turnoffs, trail splits. I'd read 2 or 3 blogs about the loop, and they all said the same thing. Quiet, not too crowded, about 11 miles total. I figured with steady pace we'd be done by mid-afternoon, back at the car before the lights started to fade. My wife asked if I was sure. I said I was. I felt good at first. The air was warm but not hot yet, a soft breeze through the trees, and a light crunch underfoot. My son ran ahead, darting from one side of the trail to the other, pointing out birds, dragging a stick through the dirt. My daughter was slower, more reserved but content. She liked the moss and stones, the colors on the tree trunks, the quiet. My wife walked beside me. She wasn't big on hikes, but she came for the kids, and because I promised it was an easy loop. It started off exactly like I expected. The trail was clear and wide enough to walk side by side. There were markings every half mile, small colored blazes nailed to trees. We passed a couple coming the opposite direction early on. They said nothing unusual, just waved. I remember that clearly now. I thought to myself, if they're just now finishing and they look fine, then this should be nothing. We stopped for water and granola at the first junction. I checked the map, looked at the fork in the trail, and took the right-hand path like I planned. The trail narrowed, climbed a little, and started winding through a denser part of the forest. It wasn't overgrown, but it felt more remote. The light changed. Trees grew closer together. The air felt still. We didn't see another person after that. 2 hours passed before I felt the first twinge of uncertainty. We were still on the trail, and the map showed it bending west toward a small stream. I kept expecting to hear water, to see the clearing, maybe spot the footbridge someone had mentioned in one of the blog posts. But the trail kept climbing, bending north instead. I told myself the map might not be exact, and sometimes terrain changed a little with the seasons. I told myself I'd recognize the stream when we hit it. But we didn't hit it. Instead, the path we were on forked again in a way that wasn't marked. No signs, just 2 narrow trails splitting apart through the trees. I pulled the map out again, unfolded it, compared the tree line and general direction, and picked the left trail because it curved more in line with what I thought was west. My wife asked if I was sure. I said I was. Within 30 minutes, the trail changed. The dirt was looser, more gravel than soil, with larger rocks and fewer signs of maintenance. The trees spaced out, letting in more sun, but that only made the heat worse. I started to sweat more. The kids were dragging their feet now. My son stopped pointing things out. My daughter said her legs hurt. I told them we'd take a real break at the next clearing. But there wasn't a next clearing. The trail narrowed even more, and it just stopped being a trail. The dirt gave way to hard, cracked earth, with no blazes, no signs, just faint paths that might have been animal tracks or old trails never maintained. I looked back and couldn't even see where we had come from anymore. I looked down at the map, my folded, wrinkled sheet of paper, and I realized I didn't know where we were. None of the landmarks lined up. None of the turns made sense. There were no stream crossings, no trail signs, no forks labeled like this. That's when I felt the first sting of panic. We turned around. I thought if we just walked back the way we came, we'd find the main junction, the part where we took the wrong turn. But when we retraced our steps, nothing looked the same. The path behind us was different. I kept stopping to study the ground, the bark, the curve of trees, but none of it helped. We walked for more than an hour before I admitted to myself that we were lost. I tried to stay calm. I took out the map, spread it on the ground, and tried to guess. Maybe we'd wandered off a service trail that wasn't listed. Maybe we crossed on a private land or an old path that had since closed. But everything was guesswork now. My phone had no signal. My wife's battery was at 9%. I kept checking the compass app, but the directions didn't match the map anymore. North led uphill when it was supposed to go down. West took us into deeper woods when a map said it should open up. We found a ridge and climbed it, thinking we could get a view, find a road or clearing or something that looked familiar. But the top only showed more trees, stretching in every direction, the sea of green broken by the occasional stone or dry creek bed. No buildings, no smoke, no towers, just forest. We sat down at the top of the ridge and drank what was left of our water. I told the kids we were resting. I told my wife we'd be okay, but I didn't believe it. I studied the map again. The more I looked at it, the more I realized how useless it was. The print was from a website that hadn't updated in years. There was a date at the bottom, 7 years ago. I remembered reading it and not thinking it mattered. We spent that night in the forest. I tried to keep us warm by building a crude shelter with fallen branches and leaves. We shared a bag of trail mix and some dried fruit. I gave the kids my outer jacket. My wife and I took turns staying awake. We heard animals in the night, raccoons, maybe deer, something that snapped a branch close by. The cold crept into our bones, and the ground was hard, unforgiving. No one really slept. In the morning, I picked a direction and we walked. I thought if we just kept moving east toward where I thought the service road should be, we'd hit something. A trail, a campsite, a fire road. We walked for hours. No sign. The trees never ended. At one point, we followed what looked like an old fence line. Rusted posts bent at odd angles, wire half buried in moss. It led nowhere, just stopped in the middle of thick brush. By late afternoon, my son was limping. My daughter was quiet, her mouth dry, her face red. My wife stopped asking questions. We had a few granola bars left, nothing more. No more water. My lips cracked, and every breath tasted like dust and metal. I started hallucinating just small things, seeing movement where there was none, thinking I heard voices in the wind. I shook my head to clear it, and it only made the dizziness worse. We found an old trail marker nailed to a tree. Faded paint barely visible. It was red. Nothing on our map had red blazes. I followed it anyway, hoping it meant something. We found another, and another. It led us deeper into thicker forest, but I didn't know what else to do. I held onto that line of red paint like it was a rope. Just before nightfall, we found the structure. An old trailhead kiosk, weather-warped wood, a shattered map board. No information. But behind it, a dirt road. Overgrown, scattered with branches, but a road. My wife almost collapsed when she saw it. I picked my son up and we just walked, dragging our feet along that road for what felt like hours. Just after dark, headlights appeared. A forest ranger truck came around a bend, slow, its beams sweeping through the trees. I flagged it down, ran into the middle of the road. The driver slammed the brakes, got out, asked questions I barely heard. I just nodded. I remember the taste of the bottled water he gave us more clearly than anything else from that day. Cold, metallic, perfect. We rode in the back of his truck to the ranger station. It was almost 15 miles from where we'd parked. He said the trail we were on had been rerouted 2 years ago after a storm washed out one of the bridges. New paths had been cut, old ones decommissioned. None of it matched our map. He said it wasn't the first time someone got lost using old prints. We spent the night in a motel nearby. The kids slept like they'd been dropped. My wife didn't say much. She just sat on the bed, staring at the wall. I sat next to her and didn't try to explain. We went home the next day. Since then, I don't trust old maps. I don't trust blog posts. I use current GPS data with backups and always check with the local ranger station before we hike. I mark our route. I bring extra water, emergency beacons, proper gear. Because I know what it's like to follow a trail you think you understand, only to find yourself miles from where you thought you were, alone, scared, and responsible for people who depend on you. We were lucky. Some aren't, but I don't rely on luck anymore. We started the hike just after 9 in the morning. The sun was already high, casting that bright, dry light that makes everything look flat and colorless. The sky was cloudless, and the air was thick with heat that clung to your skin. I should have known better. The forecast the night before said it would be hot, but I didn't think it'd be that bad. They always exaggerate the heat index. I'd been on harder trails in worse conditions. I figured we'd be back by mid-afternoon, just a few hours out and back, maybe 5 or 6 miles total. I brought 2 bottles of water for myself, one for each of the kids, and a bigger jug to share. My wife packed snacks, sunscreen, some fruit. We didn't bring much else. It was supposed to be a short day hike. The trail started easy, mostly flat and open, just dirt and gravel winding through low brush. There wasn't much shade. A few twisted trees scattered along the edge, their leaves already wilting in the heat. The first mile passed quickly. Everyone was in good spirits. My son was skipping ahead, calling out every time he saw a lizard or rabbit dart across the path. My daughter walked slower, picking little stones from the trail. My wife kept pace beside me. Her shirt was already sticking to her back with sweat. I didn't say anything, but I noticed we were all drinking more water than I expected. By the second mile, the trail got steeper. The open brush gave way to rockier ground. The path narrowed and began winding through small hills. The air felt heavier. The sun was directly overhead now, and there was almost no shade. The ground radiated heat. I could feel it through the soles of my boots. My shirt clung to my chest, soaked through. We took short breaks more often, pausing every 15 minutes or so to sip water and catch our breath. The kids were already quieter. My wife kept checking her watch. I told them we were halfway, that the trail looped back just over the next ridge. I believed it at the time. I'd looked at the map a few nights before, and the trail was described as a short scenic loop. But it was clear now that I'd underestimated the incline and how little shade there was. I hadn't accounted for how quickly heat can wear people down, especially kids. My son tripped on a rock and scraped his knee. Nothing serious, just a little blood and dirt. I rinsed it with some of my water, which I regretted immediately. We had less than half left already. I hadn't realized how fast it had gone. At the ridge, the view was wide but washed out. Just dry hills, brown shrubs, and the trail cutting back down toward the forest line. I felt a small wave of relief seeing that tree line in the distance. It looked like real forest, dense shaded. I figured we'd rest in the trees, finish our water, and take the loop back from there. The downhill stretch looked easy. We made it there in maybe 20 minutes, and the shade was like a blessing. The air felt 10 degrees cooler under the branches. We sat on a fallen log and shared the last of the fruit and half a granola bar each. I let the kids drink a little more water, but tried to be careful. The jug was almost empty now, and I still didn't feel fully sure of how far we had left. We rested for 30 minutes. I thought it would be enough. It wasn't. We started moving again around noon, and almost immediately I felt something shift. My legs felt heavier, like they were dragging through sand. The air was still thick even in the trees, and I realized that shade alone didn't fix anything. The forest was tight, the trail narrow and winding, tree roots twisting through the dirt, sharp rocks scattered everywhere. I kept stumbling. The kids started complaining about being tired. I told them we were close, but the truth was I didn't recognize anything. I expected to hit a junction, a marker, a familiar bend. But everything looked the same, green and brown, shadows, silence. That was when I started to worry. I stopped and pulled out the small paper map I'd printed from hiking website. It was barely readable now, crumpled and stained with sweat. The trail wasn't clearly marked. I couldn't tell if we were on a loop or if we'd taken a wrong turn. There were no signs, no blazes on the trees, no footprints in the dirt except ours. The ground was dry, cracking, leaves crunched underfoot like old paper. I didn't want to scare anyone, so I told them to stay close and keep moving. The water was gone, every bottle empty. I licked my lips and tasted salt. An hour passed, then another. The forest didn't open up. The trail kept winding, turning, dipping, climbing again. My daughter was lagging behind now, and my wife was holding her hand, half carrying her. My son's face was flushed deep red. His shirt stuck to his back. He asked for water, and I had nothing to give. My mouth felt like it was filled with sand. Every step fell harder. My head throbbed with the heat. I was sweating less, which worried me more than anything. I knew the signs: dizziness, dry mouth, hot skin, no sweat. We were all heading in that direction. We stopped to rest again, sitting on the dirt in a patch of shade. The kids laid down without saying anything. My wife stared off into the trees, blinking slowly, like she couldn't keep her eyes open. I told myself we'd keep moving in 10 minutes. We stayed there for nearly 30. When we got up again, I felt a wave of nausea. My legs didn't feel like mine anymore. They moved, but sluggishly, like I was controlling them from far away. My skin tingled, and I started seeing little flashes at the edge of my vision. I wiped my forehead, and my hand came away dry. My heart beat too fast. The trees seemed to blur together, their trunks stretching, twisting. I heard a noise like wind, but the leaves weren't moving. I stumbled, fell to one knee, got back up. My son had started talking to himself, repeating the same word over and over. My daughter didn't say anything anymore, just walked like she was half asleep, dragging her feet. My wife looked pale, too pale. I stopped checking the time. I didn't know how long we'd been walking. Then the trail disappeared. I don't mean it faded. I mean it was gone. 1 minute there was a path, narrow, winding, but there. And then it just vanished into undergrowth and loose rock. I turned around, looked for where we came from, and saw nothing but trees. Panic gripped my chest so hard I couldn't breathe. I turned in a slow circle and saw the same forest in every direction. No trail, no markers, just trees and dry leaves and sun pouring through in hard, hot shafts. I chose a direction and kept walking. It all blurred after that. The ground sloped down, then up, then down again. We passed the same tree, or one that looked like it, 3 different times. The sun shifted but didn't seem to move. The heat never changed. I started to see things, flashes of blue water through the trees that vanished when I got close, shapes lying in the grass that turned out to be sticks or rocks. Once I thought I saw a sign nailed to a tree, but when I blinked, it was gone. My wife started mumbling under her breath. My son was crying now, but there were no tears. My daughter stopped walking at one point and just sat down. I had to lift her to her feet. I knew then that we might not make it. I've never felt that kind of fear before. Not just fear of dying, but fear of failing the people I was supposed to protect. I thought about leaving them there just long enough to find a road, but I didn't even know which way to go. I told myself to stay upright, to keep walking, to keep them moving. I kept hoping we'd see a clearing or a sign or anything that wasn't just more trees and dust. And then we stumbled out of the trees and into light. It wasn't a road. It wasn't even a path. It was just a wide, rocky patch of hillside, maybe a landslide area, maybe something else. But it was open, bright, and down the slope. Far below us, almost hidden in the haze, I saw a glint of metal. I blinked, focused. It was a parked car, more than one, a tiny gravel lot, a trailhead. It was real. I don't know how we got down that slope. We slid, crawled, half ran. I carried my daughter most of the way, though I don't remember how. My wife clung to my son, keeping him upright. The rocks tore at our legs and hands. The sun was still brutal. Every breath hurt, but we reached the bottom. There was a trail sign, a real one, a map, a cooler near the ranger station filled with plastic bottles. I didn't ask questions. I broke it open and gave my kids water before I even took a sip. Then my wife, then me. We sat there for a long time. I don't know how long. Eventually, someone showed up, another hiker, surprised to see us like that. He helped us get back to our car, which was parked at a different lot than where we started. We'd somehow taken the wrong trail and followed it miles off course. I drove us to a gas station and bought more water, fruit, salty snacks. I called a doctor friend and explained the symptoms. He told me we were lucky. We were. We didn't talk much about it after. Not for a while. The kids were quiet for days. My wife wouldn't look at me the same for weeks. I blamed myself. I still do. Now I know better. I don't underestimate the heat. I don't trust paper maps or my memory. I overpack water, always. I tell people exactly where we're going and when we'll be back. And I don't let the trail fool me, even when it looks easy. Because I remember what it felt like to be lost out there, burning under the sky, the world spinning. We left early Friday morning, just after sunrise. The back of the SUV packed tight with sleeping bags, coolers, folding chairs, and everything else we thought we'd need for a 2-night camping trip. It was something we talked about doing for months, a family break from phones and routines, just us and the woods. I picked a spot far enough from town to feel like real wilderness, but still marked on most maps. A medium-sized state forest that had some old fire roads, a couple of open camping clearings, and no cell reception once you were more than a mile in. The idea was to keep things simple, set up camp, do some hiking, cook on a fire, maybe fish in a creek. I had double-checked the weather. The forecast showed a chance of rain Sunday afternoon, but nothing serious, just light showers moving through. The drive-out was quiet. The kids napped in the back seat most of the way. My wife stared out the window. She was nervous about bugs and the bathroom situation, but I told her everything would be fine. We got to the forest entrance a little before noon, parked just off a dirt access road where the map said there'd be space, and loaded up our packs. The trail was wide and dry, shaded by tall pine and birch, the air warm but not hot. It took a couple of hours to hike to the clearing I'd picked out from satellite images. Flat ground, close to a stream, surrounded on three sides by thick woods, but open to the sky. Perfect, I thought. We spent the rest of the day setting up the tents and getting things in order. The kids gathered sticks and stones while I dug a small fire pit and set up a tarp in case of rain. We cooked hot dogs and made esmores. The woods were quiet, just the sound of the stream trickling over rocks and the occasional bird call. That night we all slept close together. I was tired but content. I fell asleep listening to the wind move through the leaves and the steady breathing of my family around me. Sometime in the early morning, I woke up to noise. It took me a second to understand what I was hearing. Rustling, metal clinking, something being dragged or pushed. I sat up in the dark, heart pounding. I thought maybe it was a raccoon or deer sniffing around. I turned on my flashlight and looked out through the tent flap. Our cooler was open, the lid half hanging off, food wrappers scattered. One of the backpacks was tipped over, its contents spilled onto the ground. Something had been through our stuff. I climbed out, barefoot, shivering in the cool air. It was still dark, just before dawn. I checked the perimeter with the flashlight, scanning the trees. I didn't see anything moving. No glowing eyes. No signs of danger. I started picking up what I could. Bread bag torn open, granola bars chewed, plastic bags ripped. One of the pots was 10 feet from where we'd left it, muddy and dented. Something strong had dragged it. I didn't wake anyone. No need to panic. I just cleaned up what I could, shoved everything else into a bag, and went back to bed. When we all got up later, I told them an animal had gotten into the food and that we needed to be more careful about how we stored things. The kids looked a little shaken, especially my daughter. My wife didn't say much, just helped me go through our supplies. We'd lost more than I thought. Half the bread, some of the dry snacks, one of the water bottles, the backup flashlight, the bug spray. The garbage bag had been dragged into the woods and torn apart. Litter everywhere. We spent the morning cleaning, gathering what was left. I felt stupid for not hanging the food up or locking the cooler properly. By mid-morning, the weather had changed. The sky went from clear to gray fast. The wind picked up. We could hear it moving through the trees in long, low gusts. I checked the tarp and reinforced the stakes. The fire pit was soaked from the night before, so we used the camp stove to boil some water for coffee and oatmeal. It started to drizzle not long after that. Just a light mist at first, then steadier rain. It wasn't bad enough to leave, but made everything harder. Wet clothes, muddy ground. Everything feeling colder and more miserable than it should have been. We waited it out in the tents, reading, playing cards, trying to stay dry. The rain didn't stop. By afternoon, the path we'd used to reach the clearing had turned to slick mud, the edges flooding with runoff from the hill above. I walked it for a while, trying to see how bad it was, but some of our markers, sticks, rock piles were gone. Washed away. A couple of trees had come down somewhere nearby. I heard them fall. Heavy cracks and a distant thud, like thunder. I told myself it was fine. Just stay put and wait for the rain to pass. It didn't. That night the storm got worse. We stayed zipped up inside the tent, listening to wind and water all around us. At some point, I think I dozed off, but when I woke again, everything was soaked. The tent had leaked. Our sleeping bags were damp. The kids were cold, scared, curled up tight. We hadn't eaten much. The food we had left was getting low. Crushed crackers, squashed fruit, a few energy bars. The second cooler had somehow been tipped, the lid cracked. I didn't know if it was more animals or just a storm. It didn't matter. I waited for morning, thinking maybe the sky would clear and we could pack up and go. It didn't clear. It just stayed gray and wet. Visibility was low. Everything smelled like wet earth and mold. The air was heavy. I made the decision to leave anyway. I didn't want to spend another night there. Not with the gear in that shape and the kids already shaking with cold. We packed everything we could carry. The tents were soaked and heavy, so we left one behind. I stuffed the food into my backpack, divided the weight between us, and tried to find the trail back. It was gone. The rain had taken it, or covered it, or turned it into a stream. I walked in circles for a while, looking for anything familiar. A stump, a bend in the trees, the little footbridge over the rocks. Nothing looked the same. The landscape had shifted. The colors were muted, the ground uneven. Patches of standing water, clumps of wet leaves that looked like paths, but led nowhere. I tried using the compass, but I didn't trust it. I thought I was going south, but everything started to feel wrong. The stream we followed led into a low area that turned into a swamp. Thick mud sucked at our boots. My son cried. My wife held my daughter close and said nothing. We turned around and tried another way. Hours passed. The sky never changed. No sun, just a flat, dull light that gave no direction. I started to worry about how much water we had. I had the purifier pump, but it was clogged with mud. The tablets were back at the camp or gone. We had to ration what we had. I gave most of mine to the kids. My wife did the same. Our legs hurt from climbing, slipping, hauling gear. We stopped often, not by choice, but because we had to breathe, to think, to pretend we weren't lost. We didn't make a fire that night. Too wet. We wrapped up in the emergency blanket and huddled under a rock ledge we'd found. It was barely shelter, but it was dry. I kept the knife in my hand, not sure what I was expecting. Just didn't like feeling that exposed. The kids shivered all night. I kept telling myself we'd find a road tomorrow. The next day, we walked again. No trail, just a forest, all green and brown and gray. No signs, no clearings, no help. I thought I heard a plane at one point and screamed, waving my arms at the sky. But it was far off. Probably commercial. Just noise in the sky. I kept us moving in one direction, hoping we'd hit something. A fire road, a fence, a ranger station, anything. The map in my head was useless now. My phone was dead. My watch fogged up. Late in the day, we stumbled onto an old campsite. Not ours. Someone else's. Long abandoned. Rotted canvas, tent half covered in moss, a rusted tin cup, a broken lantern. I don't know how long it had been there. Years, probably. We didn't touch it. Just kept moving. That night, I knew we couldn't keep going like this. The kids were too tired. My wife was limping from a twisted ankle she hadn't told me about until I saw her wince with every step. I decided to leave them the next morning and go look for help. Just for a few hours. Find a road, a ranger, another camper. I left at dawn, running more than walking, heart racing, checking every ridge, every opening between trees. And then I saw it. A wooden post. Faded orange paint. Half rotted, leaning but there. A trail marker. I ran toward it, found a second one, maybe 50 feet further. And then a sign, hand-carved, barely readable, but pointing toward the main loop trail. I knew where we were again. I went back, fast as I could, legs burning. Took me over an hour to get to them. We dumped the rest of our gear and carried just what we needed. The walk back was slow, painful, but we knew where we were going now. The trail was wet but solid enough to follow. Just before nightfall, we reached the parking lot. The car was there, mud-covered, empty forest all around. We sat inside for a long time, heater running, just breathing. I drove us into town that night, straight to a motel. We didn't even shower, just collapsed in a clean, dry beds. We never did that kind of trip again. Not that way. Now, when I camp, I triple-check everything. Weather, routes, backup supplies. I don't take detours. I don't trust the silence of the woods as easily. It's not about fear, not exactly. It's about respect, about knowing how fast things can change when nature decides to test you. We were lucky. That's all it was. Just lucky enough to get out. We've been looking for something new to do with the kids that weekend, something outdoors and not too far from the small town we were staying in. It was our third day of a short getaway, and we'd already done the big state park trails and the lake walk. I wanted something different, something off the usual path. That's when we stopped into a small local diner for breakfast and started chatting with the guy behind the counter. He was probably in his late 50s, lean and weathered, the type who looked like he'd spent his whole life in the woods. I mentioned we were looking for a quieter place to hike, and that's when he told us about a hidden gem a bit outside of town. Not on the tourist maps, he said. Something real local. Not crowded. Just nature. A quiet trail that wound through old forest used to be part of a logging route back in the day. He gave us rough directions, said it wasn't marked anymore, but we'd know it when we saw the old fence by the gravel turnoff. The idea of getting away from the crowds and doing something a little different appealed to me. My wife looked a little unsure, but the kids were excited. We packed some sandwiches, filled our water bottles, loaded up the day packs, and drove out that way after lunch. The weather was perfect, clear blue skies, cool breeze, just warm enough to not need jackets. We turned off the main road onto a smaller one, then found the gravel stretch just like he described. A rusted metal gate hung halfway open, and a battered wooden fence ran off into the brush. It looked forgotten, but not dangerous. Just old. We parked the car in the clearing and started walking. The trail was faint, but still visible. At first, it ran alongside a narrow creek, the water shallow and full of smooth stones. Trees arched over us, tall and green and quiet. No other people, no cars, no signs. Just forest. I liked it. It felt peaceful, like we had the whole place to ourselves. The kids picked up sticks and threw pebbles into the water. My wife took photos of mushrooms and moss-covered logs. I kept track of our route in my head, watching landmarks, an odd-shaped boulder, a crooked tree, a fork in the trail near a fallen trunk. We walked for maybe an hour, maybe more. Time slipped by easily. The trail narrowed as we moved deeper, but it was still manageable. We saw no wildlife except birds and the occasional squirrel. There was a strange kind of silence in the air, not threatening, but different, deeper, like the trees had grown too old to care about people anymore. Then the trail started to vanish. 1 minute it was there, a worn line in the leaves and dirt, and the next it was barely a suggestion. We stopped. I looked around, trying to pick it back up, but the forest was thicker here. The underbrush was taller. No clear path forward. I thought maybe it would open back up a few yards ahead, so we pushed on a little, stepping over branches and ducking beneath low limbs. The kids were still in good spirits, though I could feel my wife's unease building. That's when we saw the machinery. It was rusted and half buried, like it had been there for decades. An old skidder, I think, or maybe a loader, some piece of logging equipment, slumped on its side, tangled in weeds. The paint was faded to nothing, just rust and flaking metal. The wheels were cracked. The seat was gone. Nearby were more signs, fragments of chains, busted pulleys, something that looked like a saw but was too twisted to be sure. We walked around slowly, staring at it. There was something unsettling about it, something off, like finding a graveyard in the middle of the woods. We kept going. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see more. Maybe I thought the trail would pick up again. Maybe I didn't want to admit we were lost yet. We found more remnants, wooden posts, splintered and rotting, part of what might have been an old shack. A broken stove, a pile of rusted nails. The trees grew denser as we went. The sky disappeared above us, just layers of branches and leaves. The light changed. It wasn't as bright anymore. The air felt heavier. Eventually I stopped and admitted out loud that I didn't know where we were anymore. We had no signal. The GPS map on my phone showed nothing but green. I tried to backtrack, but the forest didn't look the same in reverse. The landmarks I thought I remembered were gone or looked different. I found a boulder, but it wasn't the same one. The fallen tree by the fork was missing. I walked back and forth, hoping something would click. My wife stood with the kids, keeping them calm. I didn't want to panic them. I didn't want to panic myself. We decided to keep moving in one direction, thinking we'd eventually cross a road or find a clearer trail. We moved slowly. The brush was thick. We were sweating now, drinking more water than we planned. The kids got quieter. My daughter kept close to my wife. My son dragged his stick behind him, watching the ground. I started marking trees as we went, carving a small X with my pocket knife, just in case. We didn't find the road. We didn't find the trail. What we did find was a small clearing with a collapsed building in the center. It might have been a cabin once or a storage shed. It was hard to tell. The roof was caved in and the walls had slumped outward. The door was hanging from one hinge. Inside we found more tools, rusted, useless. A metal chair half buried in dirt. A broken lantern. It smelled like rot and dry wood. The whole place looked forgotten, left behind. The clearing was surrounded by brambles and thick trees. No other paths led in or out. We sat there for a while, ate one of the sandwiches, checked our phones again. Still no signal. It was late afternoon by then, and we knew we had to find a way out before dark. We picked a direction based on where the sun had been earlier and started walking again. The forest didn't make it easy. The terrain rose and dipped unpredictably. At one point we had to wade through a shallow marsh, the mud sucking at our shoes. Mosquitoes swarmed us. The kids complained, and we tried to keep them going. We slipped, stumbled, pushed through thorns. The forest went on. No sign of a road. No tire tracks. No fences. Nothing. By dusk, we were exhausted. We found another small clearing, this one empty. I decided we had to stop for the night. It wasn't safe to keep walking in the dark. We laid down the emergency blanket and huddled together for warmth. I kept my knife close. I didn't sleep much. Every sound in the forest felt sharper, closer. Cracking branches, rustling leaves, the occasional distant hoot of an owl. I stared into the dark, listening, waiting for morning. When the sun finally rose, it brought little relief. We were sore, cold, and thirsty. We had some water left, but not much. We ate granola bars slowly, carefully. I thought again about trying to climb a tree for a better view, but my arms were weak and the trees were too dense. We just kept walking. Late that morning, we heard something new, something mechanical. Faint but real. An engine. I froze and held up my hand. My wife grabbed the kids. We all listened. It came again, louder. I turned toward it and ran. I tripped and stumbled through the trees, calling out. Then I broke through the brush and onto a narrow dirt road. A real road. Tire tracks in the dust. I screamed again. A pickup truck came around the bend a minute later, old and covered in dust, hauling logs. The driver stopped fast and jumped out. I pointed back toward the trees where my family was still coming through. He radioed someone, gave us water, helped us sit down. We were 10 miles off the nearest marked trail, deep in what used to be a private logging tract that had been abandoned decades ago. No one went in there anymore. No maintained roads. No maps. The area wasn't even listed in recent trail guides. It had been left to the forest. We spent a few hours at a ranger station afterward. They checked us over, gave the kids snacks and juice. I told them about the route we'd taken, the structures we'd found, the equipment. They nodded, said that part of the forest had a rough history. Accidents, failed operations, some disputes over land use that went unresolved. They said we were lucky, very lucky. We drove back to our rental in silence. The kids fell asleep. My wife sat staring out the window. We never told anyone else about the trip. Not really. When people asked, we said we got turned around on a back trail. No big deal. But I still think about it. About how close we came to getting stuck for good. About how easy it was to get lost in a place that looked like a trail, looked like a shortcut, looked like a hidden gem. Sometimes things are hidden for a reason. It was meant to be just a day hike, something we'd done dozens of times before. My wife packed the trail mix, the water bottles, the energy bars. I double-checked the map, the weather, the distance. It wasn't even supposed to be remote. Just a loop trail we picked from an online list of family-friendly forest hikes, rated moderate. Not too long, a few viewpoints, and a creek crossing. The kids had their boots laced up, laughing in the back seat on the drive out. I remember thinking we'd be home by late afternoon, maybe stop for pizza on the way. We weren't reckless people. We didn't take risks. We'd gone camping plenty of times, hiked even in light rain, but we never went unprepared. We parked at the trailhead just before 9, the sky already warming with late spring sunlight. The trees were still wet with dew, and the air smelled like moss and pine and earth. Everything was green. My son carried a little pack with a whistle clipped to the strap. My daughter had a small notebook to press leaves in. We had extra layers in my pack, a first aid kit, a flashlight, a power bank for our phones. It wasn't supposed to be dangerous. It was just a walk in the woods. The trail was narrower than I expected, but well-trodden, winding gently between thick-trunked trees and patches of ferns. We made good time. We passed a wooden marker about 2 miles in, pointing toward a side loop that led to a small overlook. It added maybe 20 minutes, but the kids wanted to see it. So we went. The path dipped downhill steeply for a bit, slick with roots and soft mud where water had pooled. I was at the back, behind my wife and the kids, making sure no one slipped. I still don't know what I stepped on, maybe a loose rock or just a bad spot on the slope, but my foot went out from under me and the weight of the pack pulled me sideways. I hit hard. I heard the crack before I felt anything. It was unmistakable, a deep, snapping sound like dry wood splitting. Then came the pain. It wasn't like a sharp cut or a sudden burn. It was thick, nauseating, like the bone itself was screaming from inside. I remember trying to sit up, but my right leg bent wrong beneath me. It looked wrong. I tried to keep calm, tried to breathe, but my vision narrowed, and I heard myself groaning like a wounded animal. My wife came running back first, then the kids. Her face changed when she saw my leg. She's not a panicker, but she went quiet. I knew then it was bad. We were 3 miles in, maybe more. No cell service. We checked right away. Nothing. Not even a single bar. I took off the pack and dug out the first aid kit. We splinted the leg with sticks and a bandana, wrapped it tight. I tried standing, but the pain was so sharp I nearly vomited. I couldn't put any weight on it. We sat for a while, trying to decide what to do. It was too late in the day to risk another fall, trying to carry me out. The kids were getting tired. The sun was already slipping behind the ridgeline, and it got cold fast in that forest. We had maybe half a dozen energy bars, 2 liters of water, and no tent. Only emergency blankets, the thin, crinkly kind. It wasn't enough. My wife wanted to go for help, but I didn't like the idea of splitting up. We argued quietly away from the kids. She said the kids couldn't hike another 3 miles in the dark. I said I didn't want to be left alone like this, but it wasn't really a choice. I couldn't walk. We needed help. Eventually we agreed. She and the kids would follow the trail back and get help. I would stay with the packs, try to keep warm. They left just before dusk. I gave my wife the map, a flashlight, a whistle. She kissed me and promised she'd be fast. The kids hugged me tightly, both of them scared but trying to be brave. I watched them disappear up the trail, their footsteps fading quickly into silence. The forest changes when you're alone. The shadows grow deeper, the sound sharper. I laid back against the slope, covered myself with one of the emergency blankets, and waited. My leg throbbed constantly, a deep, pulsing ache. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through my body. I tried to stay calm, tried to stay warm. I ate a granola bar slowly, sipping water. Time crawled. By midnight, the cold had crept into my bones. I shivered violently, teeth chattering. I kept thinking of bears, though we'd never seen any out here. I gripped the flashlight in my lap and kept it pointed toward the trees. My phone stayed dead, still no service. I checked it obsessively, hoping for a signal, a text, anything. At some point I drifted in and out of sleep. The pain and cold made it hard to tell what was real and what wasn't. I thought I heard footsteps once, but it was only a squirrel in the brush. I remember whispering to myself to stay awake, stay alert. Morning would come. Someone would come. It didn't. By sunrise, there was still no sign of them. I thought maybe they hadn't made it out, or maybe help was delayed. Maybe something had gone wrong. I try not to let my mind go there, but I couldn't stop the thoughts. What if they got lost? What if they ran into something worse? I rationed the food, drinking tiny sips of water. I adjusted the splint on my leg, trying to reduce the swelling. I kept my mind busy by repeating song lyrics, old stories, anything to stay sharp. I tried calling out every hour. Nothing. Another night came. Still no help. I started hearing things, branches snapping, voices that weren't there, the wind sounding like crying in the trees. I knew it was my mind playing tricks. The cold was worse now. My breath hung in the air. My fingers felt stiff. I wrapped the emergency blanket tighter and tucked in under the trees to break the wind. I kept the flashlight off to save power. The third morning was the worst. I woke up soaked in dew, my clothes damp, my body shaking. The pain in my leg was worse. I could smell infection, sharp, foul like meat left out too long. My foot was swollen, skin tight, and red. I picked at it with a disinfectant wipe, trying not to scream. I knew I couldn't last much longer like this. I thought about crawling, just dragging myself back up the trail. It was stupid. I knew it, but I also knew I couldn't stay where I was. So I did it. I strapped on the pack, tied my bad leg as tightly as I could, and started dragging myself. Inch by inch, I used my arms to pull forward, pushing with my left foot when I could. The trail was uneven, and every bump sent a fresh jolt of pain through me. I bit down on my tongue to keep from yelling. My palm scraped raw. I moved like that for hours, maybe less. I didn't know anymore. Time blurred. I made it maybe 200 yards before I collapsed. My body gave out. I remember just laying there, gasping, everything spinning. I thought that was it. But then I heard it. A voice. Real this time. It was a man's voice, shouting from somewhere up the trail. Then another. Dogs barking. I screamed. Not words, just sound as loud as I could. Branches cracked. The voices came closer. Then they were there. A search team. Bright vests. Radios, hands on my shoulders. I cried. I couldn't help it. I just cried. They gave me water, checked my leg, radioed for an evac. A helicopter wasn't possible, so they brought a stretcher and carried me out. I passed out before we reached the trailhead. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. My leg had been clean, cast, stabilized. I was hooked up to fluids, pain meds, warmth. My wife and kids were there, faces red from crying. They made it out the first night, but the trail had washed out in places, and it took them longer than expected. They flagged down a ranger the next morning. Search teams had been combing the forest for almost a day by the time they found me. They told me I was lucky, that if I'd stayed another night out there, I might have lost the leg, might have died from exposure. I didn't feel lucky. Not then. I just felt tired. Recovery took months. I had surgery, rehab, more pain. But I kept thinking about the moment I heard those voices in the woods. The moment I knew I wasn't alone anymore. That stayed with me. We don't hike much anymore. Not like we used to. We still go out sometimes, but never far. Never without backup plans. The kids are older now, but they still remember that trip. We talk about it sometimes, what we did right, what we did wrong. We were just a family out for a walk in the woods. It didn't take much to turn everything upside down. A single misstep, a single crack, but we made it through, together. And that's what matters. It had rained the night before, not heavily, but just enough to dampen the earth and bring out the smell of wet bark and pine needles in the air. I remember standing outside the cabin early that morning, sipping coffee while the light mist curled through the trees, the sky an overcast gray. It didn't seem threatening then. It felt cool and clean, peaceful. My wife was packing snacks, water bottles, dry clothes, while the kids were bouncing around inside with their little backpacks, ready to hike. We'd planned this trip for months, a family weekend in the mountains, and even though the forecast said there might be showers, it didn't look bad. We figured if the rain came, it would be light, passing, nothing serious, the kind of weather that made the woods feel more alive. The trail we picked wasn't remote. It was well marked on the map and supposedly popular with families. About 4 miles out and 4 back, a loop that hugged a creek and passed by a shallow lake. We'd even read some reviews online. Easy, scenic, good for kids. We left the cabin just before 9 in the morning, each of us wearing light jackets, hiking boots, and hats. The kids had little walking sticks they picked up from a basket by the fireplace. We brought our phones, a paper map from the ranger station, extra food, and a basic first aid kit. We weren't amateurs. We weren't overconfident either, but we felt prepared. The trail started off soft and spongy beneath our boots, the earth dark and cool. There were puddles here and there, but nothing impassable. We walked in single file most of the time, stopping now and then to take pictures or look at moss-covered stumps or birds darting through the trees. The kids loved it. They ran ahead, but never too far. I remember thinking how good it felt to be outside, away from everything. No cars, no phones buzzing, no schedules. Just us, the forest, the sound of wind and water. By the time we reached the halfway point, the rain had started again. Not a downpour, just a steady, whispering drizzle that hissed through the leaves and soaked into our jackets. We stopped under a thick pine canopy to eat sandwiches. The air smelled rich and earthy. The creek, which we'd been following for most of the hike, had risen slightly. I noticed the water was quicker now, swirling with brown silt. A few branches floated past, bobbing in the current. We didn't think much of it. The kids were fine, still laughing and chasing each other. We wiped our hands on napkins, and continued walking. That's when the rain picked up. First, it came in gusts, then as a solid wall that made everything hazy and cold. The wind followed, sharp, swirling, loud enough to drown out our voices. I looked at my wife, and I could see the worry forming behind her eyes. We kept moving. Within 15 minutes, the trail started to change. What had been firm and clear became a muddy, slippery mess. The markings on the trees, small color blazes, were harder to spot through the rain. Some had probably washed off or been hidden by branches swaying in the wind. Footing became tricky. I slipped once, caught myself on a root, but my pants and hands were soaked and smeared with mud. The kids were struggling, their steps slower, more careful. My younger one fell and cried, but we picked him up and kept going. At one point, the trail split. The map said it shouldn't. I pulled it out, squinting through the rain, tried to orient it, but the trees were so dense and the sky so gray I couldn't see the sun. There was no sense of direction anymore. I thought I was good at directions. I usually am. But in that moment, everything looked the same. Wet trees, wet earth, flowing water. We chose the path that looked more used, more trodden. That was a mistake. The further we went, the worse it got. The trail narrowed, then dipped, then disappeared under several inches of fast-moving water. The creek had flooded and spilled over. What used to be a clear boundary between land and stream was now just a wide, shallow river curling through the forest. We tried to skirt it, stepping over logs and using roots for balance, but it was slow going and the water was rising. I kept thinking it would stop, that we'd find a trail again, that we'd loop back toward the cabin eventually. But we didn't. The water soaked through our boots, then our socks, then up to our shins. Every step was heavier. The mud sucked at our soles. My daughter's boot got stuck once, and she cried out. I pulled it free with both hands and carried her for a while. My arms burned. My back hurt. My wife took the other child. We were soaked, muddy cold. It was hard to talk, hard to think. The wind drowned out everything. Trees groaned. Branches snapped. Once, something fell in the woods nearby with a deep thud, like a heavy log crashing down. We all froze. The trail was gone. I realized it in a quiet moment, standing on a small rise with water rushing past on either side. There was no trail, no blazes, no direction, just water, mud, trees, and the sound of wind. We were lost. I didn't say it out loud, but I think we all knew. My wife's face was pale and tight. The kids were quiet now, shivering under their soaked jackets. We had to find shelter. That became the only thought. Not the trail, not the cabin. Just a place to sit, to breathe, to get out of the rain and think. I led us uphill, away from the worst of the flooding. The higher we climbed, the steeper it got, until we were on a ridge with slick rocks and tall ferns. The trees thinned slightly, and we found a cluster of fallen logs under a large overhang of rock. Not a cave exactly, but enough to crouch under and stay mostly dry. We huddled there, the four of us, shivering, dripping, trying to catch our breath. My phone was soaked, dead. My wife's too. There was no signal anyway, not out here. We dug into the packs, found granola bars and a bottle of water. We rationed it, ate quietly. The kids leaned against us, wrapped in our arms, small and still. I tried to stay calm, but inside I felt the panic starting to rise. The rain didn't stop. Hours passed. It blurred together. We tried to keep track of time, but the sky never changed. Just gray and wind and rain. I think it was afternoon when we decided we had to move again. The temperature was dropping. The kids were cold and miserable. We needed to keep moving just to stay warm. We left the shelter and followed the ridge, hoping to find a way down that wasn't flooded. But the water had spread everywhere. The soil was unstable. In one spot, the ground crumbled beneath me, and I slid several feet down a muddy slope before catching myself on a branch. My leg twisted hard, but nothing broke. It was a warning. The earth couldn't be trusted anymore. We moved slower after that. Careful, quiet, alert. My wife slipped once too, but we caught her. The kids were tired, their legs dragging, their lips blue. Every few hundred feet we stopped, adjusted our course, stepped over fallen branches and through soggy brush. The woods had changed. What used to be a friendly trail now felt like a maze, wet and hostile. At one point, I thought I heard something. A distant noise, maybe voices. I shouted, waited. Nothing came back. It could have been the wind. Could have been my own mind, desperate for help. The light began to fade. That terrified me more than anything. Night in the woods, in the rain, with no direction, no dry clothes, no fire. We couldn't let it happen. We had to find a way out before dark. I pushed us harder, downhill now, toward where I thought the road might be. I told myself that if we kept moving down, we'd hit the creek, then maybe a trail, then maybe the road. The slope grew steeper, the water deeper. At one crossing, I tested the depth with a stick and found it waist high in the center. The current was fast, pulling debris, branches, even a chunk of what looked like trail boardwalk. We couldn't cross, not safely. We turned again, followed the bank. The ground was unstable, pockmarked with water-filled holes and loose stones. I stepped wrong, fell up to my knees, and had to claw my way out with soaked fingers. My pants were heavy. I could barely lift my legs. Then through a break in the trees, I saw something. A structure, man-made, a bridge, or what was left of one. It was old, half-collapsed, covered in moss, but it spanned a gap between two ridges. Beneath it, the creek had become a churning river. We made for it carefully, slowly. The planks were slippery, many broken or missing, but it was passable. I went first, testing each step, then the kids, then my wife. On the other side, the woods changed again. Thinner, flatter. The water receded. The ground became firmer. A path appeared, faint, muddy, but real. We followed it. It led to a gravel road. When I saw the power lines above us, I almost cried. We turned right, followed the road for what felt like an hour. Just before full dark, we saw lights. A parked truck. A man standing outside it in a poncho, smoking a cigarette. He saw us and ran toward us. We were safe. They drove us back to the ranger station, gave us blankets, hot drinks, called the cabin owners, told us we were lucky. The storm had knocked out several trails, flooded parts of the park. A couple other hikers had been reported missing. Most had turned back early. We hadn't. That night, we started early that morning, loading the car with everything we thought we might need for a short family hike. It was supposed to be a simple day trip. Me, my wife, our daughter who had just turned 7, and our 10-year-old son. We were staying in a rental cabin near a forest reserve for the weekend, a getaway we had planned for months. The forest was about a 40-minute drive from the cabin, and the plan was to hike for a few hours, have lunch by a stream we had seen on the map, and return to the car well before sundown. It felt like a safe and simple plan, something we had done before on other vacations. The sky was clear, the weather mild, and everyone was in a good mood. We parked the car at the marked trailhead around 9:30, did a quick check of our backpacks, water bottles, snacks, a first aid kit, a compass, map printout, flashlight, sunscreen, and set off down the main path. The trail started out wide and clearly marked. Wooden signs with carved arrows pointed the way to various landmarks. A lookout point, a small lake, and a stream where we planned to stop for lunch. The trees were tall and spaced just enough to let the sunlight through in golden patches. Birds chirped overhead, and we passed the occasional hiker who nodded or smiled as they passed. Everything about the forest seemed calm and ordinary, the kind of place where nothing truly bad could happen. We walked slowly, letting the kids explore fallen logs and admire squirrels darting across the path. My wife kept checking her phone out of habit, but there was no signal, not even a single bar. We hadn't expected service out here, and we weren't worried. We had everything we needed, and the area was popular enough that we saw other hikers every 20 or 30 minutes. By around 11, we had reached the stream. It wasn't as wide as the pictures made it look, but it was clean and the water was cold and fast moving. We found a spot where the bank was clear and the rocks were flat enough to sit on. I helped the kids take off their shoes so they could dip their feet in the water while my wife unpacked sandwiches and fruit. We stayed there for nearly an hour, relaxing in the shade and listening to the bubbling stream. After lunch, we started back the way we came. The trail had several small forks, but we followed the signs and retraced our steps as best we could. The kids were getting a little tired, but they were still walking without complaint. I glanced at my watch. It was just past 12:30, and I figured we'd be back at the car by 2 at the latest. Somewhere along the way, we must have taken a wrong turn. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. We reached a fork we didn't recognize, but the trails looked equally worn, and we picked the one on the left, thinking it led back toward the parking area. After 10 or 15 minutes, I started to feel uneasy. The path was narrowing, and there were no more signs. The trees looked different too, closer together, and the canopy above blocked out most of the sunlight. We stopped to check the map, but without clear landmarks, it was hard to tell where we were. The compass pointed west, but we couldn't remember if we had walked west or north that morning. Still, we figured as long as we kept walking in one direction, we'd eventually intersect with the main trail or find another hiker. But the trail kept narrowing and the undergrowth grew thicker. Soon, the path disappeared entirely, and we were stepping over roots and ducking under branches. The kids were quieter now, focused on pushing through the foliage, and my wife looked more anxious than before. We kept going, hoping to find a clearing or a recognizable landmark, but everything looked the same. Just endless trees, ferns, and fallen leaves. Around 2 o'clock, we stopped to rest and drink water. The snacks were almost gone, and we hadn't seen anyone in over an hour. I climbed a small rise nearby to look around, but the view was blocked in all directions by trees. That was the first time I felt real fear. Not panic, just a deep, quiet fear that something had gone wrong in a way we hadn't yet understood. We decided to backtrack. I marked a tree with a broken stick, and we turned around, but within 20 minutes we realized we were going in circles. We passed the same gnarled tree with the V-shaped trunk 3 times. I tried to act calm for the kids, but I could feel my heart beating faster. The light in the forest was changing. It was still hours from sunset, but the shade under the trees was growing darker, cooler. My wife checked her phone again, still no signal. I tried mine too, just in case. Nothing. We kept walking. The kids were tired now, really tired, and we had to carry them alternately to keep moving. The path was completely gone now. There was no trail, just brush, dry leaves, and a sense that everything around us was closing in. By 4:30, we were completely lost. I tried to climb a tree for a better view, but the branches were too high, and I slipped halfway up. We found a dry patch of ground and sat down. The kids were shivering despite the mild weather. We only had a little water left. I started calling out, hoping someone might hear us, but there was no answer, just bird song and the occasional crack of branches in the wind. My voice sounded strange in the stillness, out of place. I wanted to keep moving, but my wife said we should stay put for a while in case someone came looking. So we stayed. The minutes dragged on. Shadows grew longer. The air felt colder than it should have. I knew we should have been back at the car by now. I knew someone would eventually report us missing, but that wouldn't be for hours. Maybe not until dark. Maybe not until tomorrow. As evening came, the forest changed. Not in any supernatural way, just in the way it always does when the sun starts to dip and the temperature falls. The birds stopped singing. The light grew soft and blue. The wind picked up, whispering through the treetops and sending leaves skittering across the forest floor. We decided to keep moving. I didn't want to be stuck in one spot when night fell. I tried to choose the most downhill path, thinking it might lead us to a stream or road. The ground was uneven and full of roots. My legs were cramping, and the kids were barely staying awake. My wife carried our daughter while I carried our son. I didn't know where we were going. I just needed to keep going. Then we saw something. At first, I thought it was a person, just a flash of movement in the distance, something light-colored between the trees. I stopped and stared, trying to make sense of it. It was gone. Then a few minutes later, we saw it again. Closer this time. A figure moving through the woods, wearing something pale, maybe white or gray. It didn't move like an animal. It didn't make any noise. My first thought was relief. Another person. Someone who could help. I called out, but the figure didn't respond. It just moved further into the trees. We followed. I don't know why. It felt like the only choice we had. But no matter how fast we moved, it stayed ahead of us, just visible through the trees, then gone again. I kept thinking it would stop, turn around, speak. It didn't. It just kept going. We followed it for nearly half an hour. The forest got denser, darker. The ground sloped downward, and the air felt damper. My wife was crying now, though she tried to hide it. The kids were half asleep in our arms. I was starting to doubt what we had seen. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, a shadow, some animal we mistook for a person. But then we stumbled into a clearing. It wasn't large, just an open patch where the trees thinned out enough to let the last light of the day through. In the center was a pile of stones, maybe 3 feet high, covered in moss and vines. It didn't look like anything special, just a pile of rocks, but it was clearly deliberate. Someone had stacked them there. Around the edges of the clearing were more signs of human presence. Old, weathered scraps of metal, a rusted canteen, broken glass half buried in the soil. It looked like a campsite that hadn't been used in years. I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. Not fear, exactly, just the feeling that we weren't supposed to be there. I didn't know what the figure was, or if we had imagined it, but I no longer cared. We couldn't follow it anymore. We needed a rest. We stayed in that clearing overnight. It was the longest night of my life. We had no tent, no blankets. The ground was cold and hard. I gathered what dry branches I could find and managed to start a small fire with a lighter from my backpack. It didn't give much warmth, but it kept away the worst of the cold. The kids slept, curled up beside us. My wife dozed fitfully. I stayed awake most of the night, listening to the sounds of the forest, every crack, rustle, and whisper of the wind. I kept expecting something to step into the clearing. Nothing did. The figure never came back. When dawn finally broke, the forest looked ordinary again. Birds chirped. Light filtered through the trees. The fear receded. We left the clearing and headed downhill. We had no map now, no direction, but we moved steadily. Around mid-morning, we heard something, a mechanical hum. Not loud, but distinct. We followed it. It grew louder. Then we saw it. A trail maintenance vehicle, bright orange, parked on a gravel road. A man stood beside it, surprised to see us. He radioed for help. Within an hour, we were sitting in the back of a ranger's truck, wrapped in emergency blankets, sipping hot water. We had been reported missing late the night before when we didn't return to our cabin. Search teams had been out since early morning. We were miles off the main trail, in a part of the forest